This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I can't believe I'm finally typing this out. For 23 years, I've told this story to close friends, but I've never had the courage to share it online. Even now, my hands are shaking as I type. It was spring of 2000, late April. I was 22 and deep into urban exploration, had been for years. There's something about abandoned places that pulls me in. The stories they hold, the silence, the way nature slowly reclaims what humans left behind. My boyfriend Ryan, we'd been together 3 years at that point, would usually come along on my adventures, though he wasn't as passionate about it as I was. We lived in Toronto back then, but we'd often drive out to explore rural areas in Ontario. That weekend we decided to check out this place in Oro-Medonte I'd heard about from another explorer. The locals called it Stone Castle or Ulster Castle. It was supposedly this old stone mansion that had been gutted by fire decades ago, sitting on a huge property with several outbuildings. The drive took about an hour and a half. It was one of those perfect spring days, not too hot, sun shining, birds singing. We found the property easily enough. It was set far back from the road, up on a hill, surrounded by dense forest. The driveway was overgrown, so we parked on a dirt path about a quarter mile from the main house and walked the rest of the way. From a distance, Ulster Castle was imposing, stone walls blackened by fire. No roof, just a shell really, but still magnificent in its decay. Around it were scattered outbuildings, a large barn, what looked like a stable, a carriage house, and several smaller structures. All of them weathered, decrepit. Ryan and I always had a system. We'd approach slowly, check for signs of recent human activity, fresh garbage, footprints, that sort of thing, and listen for several minutes before entering anywhere. Old habits from years of exploring. Everything seemed quiet, undisturbed. Let's start with the barn, I suggested. It was the closest structure, a massive wooden building with faded red paint peeling off in strips. The main doors were partly open, creaking slightly in the breeze. Ryan nodded. "Stay close," he said. He always said that. I rolled my eyes but agreed. The barn was like most abandoned farm buildings, dusty, cobwebbed with shafts of sunlight streaming through gaps in the walls. The upper level was packed with ancient hay bales, rusty farm tools, broken furniture. Nothing unusual. We took some photos, looked around, and were about to leave when I noticed a door in the floor, a cellar entrance. "Want to check downstairs?" I asked, already knowing Ryan would be hesitant. "I don't know, Mia. Those stairs look rotted." He was right. The wooden steps descending into darkness didn't look particularly sturdy. "I'll go first. If they hold me, they'll hold you." I clicked on my flashlight and started down before he could argue further. The stairs groaned but held. The moment my light swept across that cellar, I knew something was wrong. The walls were covered in symbols, not graffiti, but deliberate markings in red and black. Some looked like letters from alphabets I didn't recognize. Others were geometric patterns, spirals, eyes. They were chaotic, overlapping, almost frantic in execution. "Ryan," I called up, my voice sounding strange in the musty air. "You need to see this." He came down reluctantly, his flashlight beam joining mine. "What the fuck?" he whispered. In the center of the cellar was what I can only describe as an altar, a flat stone slab raised about 3 feet off the ground, surrounded by burnt-down black candles. On top of the slab was a large knife, like a butcher knife, with dark stains on the blade. Beside it sat a glass bottle filled with reddish-brown liquid. I've seen some weird stuff in abandoned places, drug paraphernalia, evidence of squatters, teenage party remnants, even some occult symbols from kids playing around. But this was different. This felt used, recent, purposeful. "We should go," Ryan said, gripping my arm. "Wait," I replied, pulling away slightly. "There's another door." Off to one side was a heavy metal door, partially ajar. I pushed it open with my foot, shining my light through. It led to the silo attached to the barn, but it had been modified. The interior was empty except for chains bolted to the concrete floor. The cylindrical walls had been reinforced with metal bars welded together to form a cage, and the inside of those walls, they had marks on them. Deep grooves in the concrete that looked disturbingly like claw marks, as if something had desperately tried to escape. I stepped back, suddenly cold, despite the mild spring day. "Mia, we're leaving, now." Ryan's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. For once, I didn't mind. We hurried back up the stairs and out of the barn, blinking in the sunlight. Part of me wanted to just get in the car and drive away, but there was another part, the stubborn explorer in me, that wanted to check the other buildings, to piece together what the hell was happening here. "The stable next," I said, pointing to the long, low building at the back of the property. Ryan grabbed my hand. "Are you serious? After what we just saw?" "We came all this way," I insisted. "Just a quick look, and then we'll go." He sighed but followed me. I still remember how quiet it was as we walked across the overgrown yard. No birds singing anymore, just the soft sound of our footsteps in the grass. The stable's double doors were secured with a rusty chain, but one of the side doors was unlocked. The smell hit us immediately, the unmistakable stench of decay and death. I covered my nose with my sleeve and stepped inside. My flashlight revealed what the smell had already suggested. Animals, dozens of them, in various states of decomposition. Cats, dogs, some wild animals like rabbits, foxes, what looked like a coyote. Some were just skeletal remains, others more recent. Many had been skinned, eviscerated, arranged in unnatural positions. I heard Ryan gag behind me. "Fuck this," he said, his voice tight with anger and disgust. "We're leaving right now. This isn't some harmless abandoned place, Mia. Someone is doing sick shit here." I couldn't argue. We backed out of the stable, and Ryan firmly shut the door behind us. He was already walking quickly toward the path that would lead us back to our car. I followed, but as we passed the carriage house, I paused. "Mia," Ryan hissed, noticing I'd stopped. "Just 1 second," I said, peering through a broken window. The carriage house appeared empty, just a concrete floor with some old tires and broken glass. Nothing like what we'd seen in the other buildings. That small detour probably saved us. As I turned to rejoin Ryan, I caught movement in the distance, down by where we'd parked. Someone was at our car. I grabbed Ryan's arm and pointed. A man was leaning into our car window, rummaging around inside, and he wasn't alone. Behind him was a group of people. I counted 8, including 2 children who looked about 12. They were spread out along the path carrying what looked like makeshift weapons, baseball bats, sticks, one had a cane, another a golf club. "They're at our car," I whispered, pulling Ryan behind the carriage house where we couldn't be seen. "How many?" he asked, his face pale. 8, maybe 9. 2 kids. We had 2 options. Try to circle around through the woods and somehow get to our car without being seen, or confront them directly. Neither seemed particularly safe. Ryan took a deep breath. Let's walk straight down there. Act normal. They don't know what we've seen. It seemed insane, but I couldn't think of a better plan. We stepped out from behind the carriage house and walked casually down the path toward our car. The group spotted us immediately. The man at our car straightened up and said something to the others. They seemed startled, almost as surprised to see us as we were to see them. The group scattered slightly, some backing away into the trees, others gripping their weapons tighter. As we got closer, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The man by our car looked to be in his 50s, unkempt beard, wearing dirty jeans and a flannel shirt. The two children, a boy and a girl, stared at us with expressionless faces. "Afternoon," Ryan called out, his voice impressively steady. "Beautiful property, isn't it?" The man's eyes narrowed. "This is private land. You're trespassing." "We didn't see any signs," I said, trying to match Ryan's casual tone. "We're architecture students, just admiring the stonework on the old castle. We didn't mean any harm." It was a lie we'd used before when caught trespassing. Usually worked well enough. The man looked at us for what felt like an eternity, then glanced back at the others. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "You need to leave," he finally said, "and don't come back." "Of course," Ryan replied. "That's exactly what we were doing." We'd reached our car by then. The driver's side door was open, and our glove compartment had been rifled through. Ryan slid into the driver's seat, and I hurried around to the passenger side, keeping my eyes on the group the whole time. As soon as we were both inside, Ryan started the engine and pulled away, driving faster than was safe on the rough path. In the rearview mirror, I watched the group standing there, watching us go. The children hadn't moved at all. We'd made it about 5 minutes down the road when I noticed the black pickup truck behind us. No license plate. "Ryan," I said quietly, "don't react, but I think we're being followed." He checked the mirror and nodded slightly. "Just stay calm." The truck stayed behind us for nearly 20 minutes, never getting too close, but never turning off either. Ryan drove randomly, taking turns whenever possible, trying to lose them. Finally, when we reached Barry, the truck disappeared. We went straight to the police station and filed a report. The officer took our statement but didn't seem particularly concerned. Trespassing, potential break-in of our car, minor offenses. When I tried to explain about the symbols, the altar, the animals, he looked skeptical. "Probably just kids messing around," he said. "Or maybe some people into that goth stuff, you know? If you weren't supposed to be there in the first place." We left, feeling unsatisfied and shaken. On the drive home, Ryan and I barely spoke. What could we say? We'd seen something disturbing, something wrong, but we had no proof, no context, no explanation. All these years later, I still don't know what was happening at Ulster Castle. Last month, my cousin, also into urban exploration, mentioned wanting to check out an abandoned stone mansion in Oromodanti. My blood ran cold. I told her I'd go with her, but this time I'll be prepared. I've been researching the property, the area, trying to find out who those people were. I've learned to shoot. I'm not going in blind again. Sometimes I still dream about those symbols on the walls, the chains in the silo, the expressionless faces of those children. I wake up wondering if I imagined it all, but I know I didn't. Something evil was happening at Ulster Castle, and I have a feeling it still is. Story 2. I can't sleep tonight. Actually, I haven't had a decent night's sleep in my own house for the past 2 weeks. Every little creak, Every shadow on the wall sends me into a panic. I've been staying with my parents most nights, but I'm at my place now trying to face my fears. Bad idea. I'm writing this at 3 in the morning because every time I close my eyes, I'm back there. Back to that night when I realized I wasn't alone in my house. It was about 2 weeks ago. We'd been having this crazy weather pattern. For days, lots of wind, rain coming and going, and the forecast said a big storm was rolling in. I had nowhere to be that Saturday, so I decided to just chill at home, play some video games, and basically waste the day away. Looking back now, I wish I'd just gone to my friend's place like he'd asked. I spent most of the morning playing Elden Ring, trying to beat this boss that had been kicking my ass for days. Outside, the sky kept getting darker. By afternoon, it was almost black, and the wind was really picking up, rattling my windows. I remember checking my phone and seeing all these storm warnings, but I was in my little bubble, safe inside, controller in hand, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. Around 6, I got hungry and made some microwave pizza. The storm was really going by then, thunder so loud it was shaking pictures on my walls. I decided to switch from games to movies and scrolled through Netflix until I found this horror movie I'd been wanting to watch. I know, watching a horror movie during a thunderstorm while alone in the house, classic dumb horror movie victim move. But I've always been into scary stuff and never really got freaked out by it. The movie was about some family being stalked in their home. Ironic, right? I was about halfway through it when the power flickered a few times. I paused the movie and went to get some candles ready just in case, plus refill my water bottle. That's when it happened. The first thing that should have tipped me off that something was wrong. I was standing in my kitchen filling my water bottle when a flash of lightning lit up the room. On the wall opposite me, I saw a shadow move. Not like when tree branches cast moving shadows during a storm. This was different. It moved deliberately, like a person walking. But I was alone in the house, and the shadow was too big to be my cat, who was hiding under the bed because of the thunder. I froze with the water still running. The shadow had moved from one side of the wall to the other, then disappeared. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was just my imagination. The horror movie had me on edge, and the lightning was playing tricks with the shadows. I shut off the tap, took a deep breath, and went back to the living room. For the next hour or so, I tried to focus on the movie, but I kept glancing at my walls every time lightning flashed. Nothing, just normal shadows. I started to relax and even laughed at myself for getting spooked. The movie ended around 9:30, and I switched to YouTube, watching some random videos to calm down before bed. The storm was still raging outside. Rain was hammering against the windows, and the wind was howling through the trees in my backyard. Every now and then, I'd hear a branch snap or something hit the side of the house. Normal storm stuff, right? I was deep into some video essay when lightning flashed again, brighter than before, lighting up my entire living room for a split second. And there it was again, a shadow moving across the wall behind my TV. This time I couldn't explain it away. The shadow was shaped like a person, and it moved like it was trying to be quiet, ducking down after being caught in the light. I paused the video. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid even as I said it. No answer except for the thunder. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, then slowly got up from the couch. My house isn't that big, just a small one-story with a living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and 2 bathrooms. I checked everywhere, Looked behind the couch, in the spare bedroom, the closets, under my bed. Nothing. No one was there. I even checked the attic access in the hallway, standing on a chair and poking my head up there with the flashlight. Just boxes and insulation. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the storm and the movie were making me see things. But I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. By 11, I was exhausted from the adrenaline and decided to just go to bed. Maybe sleep would reset my brain. I locked all the windows, double-checked them actually, made sure the front and back doors were locked, and headed to my bathroom to take a shower. The hot water helped calm me down. I stood under it for a long time, letting it drown out the sound of the storm. With the bathroom door closed and the shower running, I couldn't hear the thunder anymore. It was just me and the steam and the white noise of water. For the first time all night, I felt safe. I was shampooing my hair, eyes closed, when I heard it. A crash so violent that I felt it through the floor. It wasn't thunder. This was inside the house. It sounded like something had exploded. The walls literally vibrated with the force of it. I jumped out of the shower, not even turning off the water, wrapped a towel around me, and grabbed my phone from the counter. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely unlock it. I stood there in the bathroom, dripping wet, listening. The house was silent, except for the shower still running and the storm outside. I had to look. I couldn't just hide in the bathroom all night. So I quickly pulled on the clothes I'd left on the counter, just boxers and a t-shirt, and cracked open the bathroom door. The hallway was dark. I turned on my phone flashlight again and slowly made my way toward the living room. Nothing seemed out of place there. The TV was still on, showing the paused YouTube video. I moved to the kitchen. Nothing. Then I turned toward the back of the house. The back door was... God, I still get chills thinking about it. The back door was completely destroyed. Not like someone had broken in, like someone had broken out. The door had been ripped open from the inside with so much force that it had slammed against the exterior wall of the house. The frame was splintered, pieces of wood scattered across the floor. Rain was pouring in, forming a puddle on my kitchen tiles. I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I ran back to the bathroom, locked the door, and called 911. I remember trying to explain to the dispatcher what had happened, but I was hyperventilating. She kept telling me to breathe, to calm down. She asked if I was alone in the house. I said I thought so, but I wasn't sure anymore. The police took 20 minutes to arrive because of the storm. 20 minutes locked in my bathroom, sitting in the tub with the shower curtain drawn, straining to hear any sound of movement in the house over the noise of the storm and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. When they finally got there, 3 officers searched my entire house. They confirmed no one was there, but the back door, they couldn't explain it. One officer, this older guy with a gray mustache, examined the door frame closely. He showed me how the wood had splintered outward, not inward. This door was broken from the inside, he said, with considerable force. They asked if I had been alone all day, if I had any enemies, if anyone had a key to my house. No, and no. They took pictures, filed a report, and told me they'd patrol the area for the rest of the night. One of them helped me nail a piece of plywood over the door frame as a temporary fix. After they left, I packed a bag and drove to my parents' house. I couldn't stay there, not after what the police had told me. Someone had been in my house. Someone had been hiding, watching me all day as I played games, ate pizza, watched that stupid horror movie. They'd been there when I was looking for them, maybe crouching in a corner as I passed by. maybe pressed against the wall behind a door. They'd been there when I was in the shower, vulnerable and naked. And then they'd left, violently, suddenly. What made them leave? What were they planning to do before something changed their mind? Why were they in my house to begin with? I've been back to the house a few times since then, always during daylight, always with someone else. I've had the locks changed, installed security cameras, and ordered a new door. But I still can't sleep there, because every time I close my eyes, I see that shadow moving across my wall. I wonder how long they had been there before I noticed. I wonder if they're still watching me somehow. The police never found any fingerprints besides mine. No one in the neighborhood saw anyone suspicious. The storm washed away any footprints that might have been in my yard. I keep asking myself, what if I hadn't gone to take a shower? What if I had fallen asleep on the couch? What would have happened to me? I don't know if I'll ever feel safe in my own home again. Sometimes I think about selling the house and moving, but then I wonder, would they find me again? The shadows on my walls don't look the same anymore. Every time lightning flashes, I freeze, waiting to see movement, because now I know that sometimes when you feel like you're being watched, you are. Story 3. I've been trying to make sense of what happened last summer, but I still get chills thinking about it. I don't care if anyone believes me or not at this point. I just need to get this off my chest before it eats me alive. This happened in July 2015 on Orcas Island in Washington. I was staying at my buddy Tyler's family cabin for a few weeks before the fall semester started. I'd just finished my junior year at UW studying environmental science, and I was looking forward to some chill time away from Seattle. I brought my dogs with me. Duke, this big golden retriever mix who's usually terrified of water, and Pepper, a border collie who follows Duke everywhere. Orcas Island is gorgeous, but it's also really isolated once you get away from the touristy spots. There's this lake there called Cascade Lake that's pretty popular with locals, but it has these secluded spots most tourists don't know about. Tyler had been going there since he was a kid and knew all the hidden areas. That day started out totally normal. Me, Tyler, his girlfriend Jen, and this other guy Mark decided to head to Cascade Lake around noon. It was hot as hell, probably mid-80s, which is pretty warm for the Pacific Northwest. We packed some beers, sandwiches, and snacks for a chill afternoon. The spot Tyler took us to was on the northeastern side of the lake, away from the main swimming area. You had to hike about 15 minutes through this dense forest to get there. The trees were so thick they blocked out most of the sunlight, making the trail feel like a tunnel. I remember the smell of pine and damp earth, and how quiet it got the further we walked. The dogs were loving it though, running ahead and sniffing everything. We finally broke through to this small rocky beach area. There was nobody else around, which was exactly what we wanted. The lake stretched out in front of us, this dark blue-green color that seemed to get darker the further out you looked. The water was so clear near the shore that you could see maybe 10 feet down, but beyond that, it just turned black. Cascade Lake is deep, over 200 feet in some spots, and I always felt uneasy looking out at the middle. We set up our stuff, cracked open some beers, and just hung out for a while. Tyler and Mark went swimming right away, but I stayed on shore with Jen. The dogs were running around exploring the area, staying close to the tree line. Duke especially never went near the water. He's had this weird phobia of swimming since he was a puppy. Around 2 o'clock, I was just finishing my sandwich when I noticed something strange. There was this formation of twisted roots along the shoreline about 50 yards from where we were sitting. They curved up out of the water in this weird way that reminded me of a dragon's head with what looked like eye sockets and a long snout. I pointed it out to Jen, who said, "Huh, that's creepy. Never noticed that before." I decided to walk over and check it out. The dogs followed me, with Pepper splashing happily in the shallows while Duke stayed on dry land as usual. As I got closer to the root formation, I felt this weird drop in temperature, like I'd walked through a pocket of cold air. I figured it was just shadows from the trees, but it still felt off. The roots were even weirder up close. They were dark and twisted, covered in a slick moss that made them look almost scaly. There was this small alcove formed behind them where the water was completely still, separated from the main lake. The water there was darker too, almost black, despite being shallow. I was taking a few pictures with my phone when Duke suddenly went nuts. I've never seen him act like that before. He started barking and lunging toward the water, which, like I said, he never does. Then before I could grab him, he just launched himself into the lake and started swimming frantically toward deeper water. Pepper immediately followed him, barking the whole time. I shouted for them to come back, but they were completely ignoring me. Duke was swimming like something was chasing him, thrashing and yelping. At first I thought maybe he'd stepped on something sharp, but then I noticed this weird disturbance in the water behind him, like something was moving just beneath the surface. My first thought was that it might be a big fish or maybe an otter. I yelled for Tyler and Mark, who were swimming on the other side of our little beach area. They started swimming over, but they were pretty far away. I waded in to try to grab Duke, who was now maybe 30 feet out. The water was cold, much colder than it should have been on a hot July day. That's when I saw what looked like a floating log about 20 feet beyond where Duke was swimming. It was dark, maybe 6 or 7 feet long, just barely breaking the surface. But something about it didn't look right. It wasn't moving with the gentle waves like a log should. It was too deliberate. As I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, the log shifted slightly, and I realized with absolute horror that I was looking at something alive. The illusion broke all at once. What I had thought was bark was actually a rough, scaly surface, and what I had assumed was a broken branch was actually a long, reptilian snout. There were 2 bumps on the top of this thing that suddenly opened to reveal yellowish eyes with vertical pupils, like a snake's. Those eyes locked onto mine, and I felt my entire body go cold. I've never experienced anything like it, this primal fear that bypassed all rational thought. This thing was studying me, assessing me. I could feel its intelligence, and that was somehow the most terrifying part. Duke and Pepper were going absolutely ballistic now, swimming in frantic circles and barking non-stop, but the creature didn't even flinch. It just kept staring at me, unblinking, completely unbothered by the noise. That's when I realized it wasn't afraid of us at all. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on it. "Tyler! Mark!" I shouted again, my voice cracking. "Get out of the water! Now!" They must have heard the panic in my voice because they started swimming toward shore immediately. Jen was standing up now, shading her eyes, trying to see what was happening. The thing in the water didn't move as Tyler and Mark approached. It just kept watching me specifically, like it had chosen me for some reason. Then, without any splash or disturbance, it slowly sank beneath the surface, disappearing into the blackness of the deeper water. I was still standing ankle-deep in the lake, paralyzed. Duke and Pepper finally swam back to me, whimpering and shaking. I grabbed their collars and pulled them onto shore, scanning the water for any sign of the creature. "What the hell, man?" Tyler asked, breathing hard as he reached the beach. "What's going on?" I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words sounded insane even as I was saying them. "A reptilian creature? In a freshwater lake in Washington?" They looked at me like I was having a mental breakdown or playing a joke. "Maybe it was a big sturgeon," Mark suggested. "They can get pretty massive." But I knew what I saw. Those eyes, that deliberate intelligence. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't anything I could explain. We packed up our stuff quickly after that. Nobody wanted to admit it, but the mood was ruined. The dogs wouldn't go anywhere near the water, and they kept looking back over their shoulders as we hiked back to the car. Duke was still shivering, even though it was over 80 degrees out. That night at the cabin, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those yellow eyes whenever I closed mine. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and started searching online for anything about strange sightings in Cascade Lake. Most of what came up was just tourist information, but there was this small local forum where people shared fishing stories. I found a thread from the previous year about a man who had drowned in Cascade Lake. His body had been found near those same twisted roots I'd been examining. The official report said he'd gotten caught in an undertow, but what caught my attention was a comment someone had made about the body having otter bite marks all over it. Otters don't typically attack humans, especially not enough to leave marks all over someone. I kept digging and found another post from a woman claiming her boyfriend had seen a long black shape gliding beneath their kayak in the deepest part of the lake. She said he'd been so spooked they'd never gone back. The next morning I asked Tyler if he knew anything about creatures in the lake. He laughed it off at first, but then his expression changed. "My grandfather used to talk about something living in Cascade Lake," he admitted. "Local legend says there are underwater tunnels connecting the lake to the ocean, and that things can move between them. The old-timers used to warn kids not to swim alone or go out too deep." "Do you believe it?" I asked. He shrugged. Seemed like bullshit until yesterday. Later that day, I drove into town and stopped at this little historical society museum they have. The elderly volunteer there was organizing some old photographs when I walked in. I asked her casually about local legends, especially any about Cascade Lake. She gave me a long look before answering. "Those old stories aren't just made up to scare children," she said quietly. "The native people here had names for the things that lived in the deep waters. They respected them, left offerings sometimes. When settlers came, they dismissed it all as superstition." She paused, "until people started disappearing." She told me about records from the early 1900s of swimmers going missing, their bodies sometimes washing up days later with unexplained injuries. The official explanations were always drowning, animal attacks, or boating accidents. But she said her own grandfather had seen something while fishing at dawn, something with scales that rose up beside his boat, nearly capsizing it. "The lake is over 100,000 years old," she said. "Formed during the last ice age. That's plenty of time for things to evolve in isolation, or for things to find their way in from elsewhere and make it their home. We stayed on the island for another week after that, but I never went back to Cascade Lake. I couldn't bring myself to. Even driving past it on the way to other spots made my skin crawl. The dogs seemed to feel the same way. They'd get anxious whenever we drove near it, Duke whining and Pepper pacing in the back seat. On our last night there, I woke up around 3 in the morning to Duke growling at the bedroom window. The cabin was about a mile from the lake, up on a wooded hill. I got up to check what he was looking at, expecting to see a deer or raccoon. There was nothing there that I could see, just darkness and trees. But Duke wouldn't stop growling, his hackles raised. And then I noticed something. The ground outside the window was wet, not like it had been raining, but like something dripping had passed by. A trail of water led from the trees toward the window, then back again. We left the next morning, earlier than we'd planned. I've never gone back to Orcas Island, and I never will. I still don't know what was in that lake, watching me with those ancient, calculating eyes. But I know it was real, and I know it's still there, waiting beneath the surface of Cascade Lake. Sometimes I dream about it. In the dreams, I'm swimming in black water, and I can feel it circling below me, getting closer with each pass. I always wake up before I see it fully, but the message is clear enough. It let me go that day, but it remembers me, and somehow I know it's patient. Story 4. I honestly don't know why I'm finally writing this down. Maybe it's the therapy sessions, or maybe I just need to put this somewhere before it drives me completely insane. I still own that cabin in Blackwood Forest, but I haven't been back in 8 months. I don't think I can ever go back. I bought the place 5 years ago as a getaway from my IT job in the city. It was exactly what I wanted, completely isolated, surrounded by dense pine forest, and about a kilometer off the main road. In summer, it's a beautiful hike. In winter, it's brutal, but that was part of the appeal. Total isolation. No neighbors, no distractions. Just me, my dog Max, and nature. The cabin itself isn't fancy, about 70 years old with 2 bedrooms, a basic kitchen, a living area with a high ceiling that opens to a small loft space, and a bathroom I renovated myself. The realtor practically gave it away. She mentioned something about it sitting empty for years, but I was too excited about the price to ask questions. The first summer was perfect. I'd drive up on Fridays, hike in with Max, and spend weekends fishing, hiking, or just sitting on the porch reading. I even installed solar panels and a decent internet connection so I could work remotely. By the second year, I was spending weeks at a time there. That's when I started noticing things. It began with temperature differences. The main living room would be perfectly warm with the wood stove going, but stepping into the second bedroom felt like walking into a freezer. I checked for drafts, added insulation, even replaced the window. Nothing helped. That room stayed unnaturally cold. Then I started feeling watched. Not all the time, just occasionally. I'd be cooking dinner and suddenly get this overwhelming sensation that someone was staring at me. I'd spin around, but there was never anyone there, just Max, usually sleeping by the fire. I chalked it up to being alone too much. City guy, not used to the silence, you know? But it kept happening, and it got worse at night. The first time I heard the doors, I was half asleep on the couch. It was around 11 at night, and I distinctly heard the spare bedroom door creak open. Max heard it too. His head shot up, ears perked. I grabbed my flashlight, heart racing, and checked every door in the cabin, all closed and locked. I double-checked the front and back doors, the windows. Everything secure. I tried to laugh it off. Old cabins make noises, right? The wood expands and contracts. But it happened again the next night, and the night after. Always around the same time. Always the same creaking sound of a door slowly opening. And every time I checked, nothing was out of place. I started sleeping with headphones on, playing white noise to drown out the sounds. It helped for a while, until the footsteps started. The loft area overlooks the main living space. It's small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with a railing and a narrow staircase leading up to it. I rarely used it, just stored some extra supplies and old books up there. But one night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to footsteps directly above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Back and forth, like someone pacing. I ripped off my headphones and sat up in bed. Max was already awake, staring at the ceiling, completely alert. The footsteps continued, heavy enough to make the old floorboards creak. 10 steps one way, pause, 10 steps back, over and over. I'm not ashamed to admit I was terrified. I couldn't move. I just sat there, clutching my blanket, listening to someone, something, walk back and forth in a part of my own cabin I rarely entered. After what felt like hours, but was probably just minutes, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. As soon as the sun came up, I grabbed my baseball bat and checked the loft. Nothing was disturbed, no footprints in the thin layer of dust, nothing. I told myself it was just the structure settling. Maybe raccoons or squirrels had gotten into the roof space. I even convinced myself to stay another night, but I moved my bedding to the couch in the main room, directly under the loft where I could see it. Big mistake. That night, around 2 in the morning, it started again. The footsteps were unmistakable, and now that I was directly underneath, there was no way to pretend it was just the house settling. Something was walking up there, something heavy. I turned on every light in the cabin and stared up at the loft. There was nothing visible, but the footsteps continued, back and forth, back and forth. Max was whining now, pressing himself against my leg. I shouted up at the loft, "Who's there?" My voice cracked. No response, but the footsteps stopped immediately. The silence stretched for maybe 30 seconds. Then the footsteps started again, but different. Instead of pacing, they were now walking directly toward the loft stairs, toward me. I grabbed Max's collar and my car keys and ran out of the cabin in my pajamas. I spent the rest of the night in my locked car, engine running for heat, waiting for sunrise. At first light, I packed some essentials and drove back to the city, telling myself I needed a break from the isolation. I stayed away for 3 weeks. I told friends about the strange occurrences, and they had plenty of rational explanations. Old pipes, wind in the chimney, my imagination working overtime in the silence. One friend, Tom, even offered to come with me next time. Having someone else there would prove there was nothing supernatural going on. So in early October, Tom and I drove up together. The whole way there, I felt sick to my stomach. But with Tom cracking jokes and Max excited in the back seat, I started to believe I'd just been working too hard, letting the isolation get to me. The cabin looked peaceful when we arrived. We hiked in, got a fire going, and cracked open some beers. I gave Tom the master bedroom, and I took the couch again. No way was I sleeping under that loft alone. Nothing happened that first night, or the second. Tom was right. I'd been letting my imagination run wild. By the third day, I was relaxed enough to joke about my ghost. Then came our last night at the cabin. We'd had a few drinks, played some cards, and Tom had gone to bed around 11. I stayed up reading, with Max curled up beside me. Around midnight, I heard it, the familiar creak of a door opening. I froze, listening. Nothing followed. I almost woke Tom, but decided against it. If it was just the house settling, I'd look ridiculous. I turned back to my book, trying to ignore the cold sensation creeping up my spine. That's when Max suddenly sat up, alert, staring at the loft. His ears were forward, body rigid. Then came the sound I'll never forget, a massive thud from the loft, like something very heavy had fallen to the floor or jumped down onto it. Max didn't bark, he didn't growl, he just froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid, his eyes fixed on something above us. I've never seen a dog look so terrified. I followed his gaze upward, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness of the loft. The silence that followed was deafening. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when Max did something that still haunts me. He slowly backed away from the couch, his eyes never leaving whatever he was seeing in the loft until his back hit the wall. Then he slid down into a crouching position, trembling violently. I called out for Tom, my voice barely a whisper at first, then louder. "Tom! Tom!" He stumbled out of the bedroom, confused and half asleep. "What's wrong?" Before I could answer, we both heard it. Footsteps directly above us in the loft. Slow, deliberate steps moving toward the railing that overlooked the living room. Tom's eyes widened. "What the fuck is that?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed upward, where Max was still staring. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the loft. Whatever it was now standing right above us at the railing, looking down. We couldn't see anything there, nothing at all, but Max could. I've never seen pure terror in a human face until that moment when Tom realized we weren't alone. He grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." We didn't pack. We didn't grab our phones or wallets. I just snatched Max's collar and my car keys, and we ran. We ran through total darkness, stumbling over roots and rocks, through the forest to where we'd parked. The drive back to the city is a blur. Neither of us spoke. Max shook in the back seat the entire way. The next day, I called a local friend to go retrieve our belongings. He reported nothing unusual, just an empty cabin with the lights still on and our stuff scattered around like we'd left in a hurry. I've researched the cabin's history since then. There's not much information available. It was built in the early 50s and was a permanent residence for a family for about 7 years. Then they just vanished. No record of them moving or selling the property. It sat empty for decades before being sold, renovated, and turned into a vacation property that changed hands several times before I bought it. I've tried to convince myself there's a logical explanation, but I can't forget the look on Max's face as he stared at something I couldn't see, something that was watching us from above. I still own the cabin. I can't bring myself to sell it to some unsuspecting family, but I can't go back either. Whatever is there, it's getting bolder. The footsteps started as distant pacing, then moved closer. Then came that massive thud, like it had jumped down into the space with us. I don't know what would have happened if we'd stayed that night. I don't want to know. I just know that something was watching us from that loft. Something that Max could see, but we couldn't. And I can't shake the feeling that if we'd stayed even minutes longer, we would have finally seen it too. And somehow, that thought terrifies me more than anything else. Story 5. I still can't sleep with the attic door closed. It's been 3 months since it happened, but every time I hear a creak in my apartment ceiling or footsteps from the unit above, my heart starts racing. I know I need to write this down just to get it out of my system. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can tell me how to stop jumping at shadows. It started after I found out about Sarah. 5 years of marriage, and I had to find out through a text message that accidentally popped up on her iPad while I was using it to check a recipe. Just a simple message from someone named Mike from marketing, saying how much he missed her after their amazing weekend. I confronted her that night, and the truth came pouring out between her sobs. 6 months. 6 fucking months she'd been seeing this guy from her office. I was already stretched thin at work. 17-hour days. Leading a tech startup's product team will do that to you, and this just broke me. I walked out that night checked into a hotel, and the next morning went to work and quit. Just like that, 10 years climbing the corporate ladder, gone in a 5-minute conversation with my stunned boss. I needed to get away. From Sarah, from the city, from everything. I had enough savings to disappear for a while, so I started looking online for remote rentals. That's when I found the cabin in Pinewood Forest. The listing described it as rustic, which was a polite way of saying it hadn't been updated since the 80s. But it was cheap, isolated, and available immediately. Perfect. The drive took almost 4 hours, mostly on highways until the last 40 minutes when I turned onto increasingly narrow roads. The rental agent had emailed me entry instructions and directions since there was no cell service out there. When I finally pulled up to the cabin around 4 in the afternoon, I felt a weird mix of relief and unease. The cabin itself was exactly what I expected. Weathered wood exterior, small porch with a rocking chair, surrounded by tall pines that blocked most of the sunlight. Inside was a main room with a kitchenette, a worn leather couch, and a fireplace. A small bedroom and bathroom branched off to the side. It was the kind of place that smelled perpetually of old wood and mothballs no matter how much you cleaned. What caught my eye right away was the ceiling, or specifically, the small square trapdoor in the center of it. A pull string with a wooden handle dangled from it. The listing had mentioned storage space in the attic, but seeing that door made me instantly uncomfortable. It looked ancient compared to the rest of the cabin, like it had been salvaged from somewhere much older. I unpacked my few belongings and tried to settle in. The silence was overwhelming after years of city noise. That first night I built a fire, heated up some canned soup, and fell asleep on the couch while trying to read a book I'd brought. I woke up around 3 in the morning to what sounded like footsteps above me. At least, that's what my half-asleep brain registered before I fully woke up and realized it must have been branches hitting the roof, or maybe raccoons. The forest was alive with wildlife. I'd seen deer on my drive in, and the rental guide warned about bears in the area. The next day passed uneventfully. I hiked around the property, collected some firewood, and tried not to think about Sarah or my impulsive job resignation. I made a mental note to drive into town the next day for more groceries, since I'd only brought the basics. That night was when things got weird. I'd made spaghetti, enough for dinner and leftovers the next day, and left the remainder in a container on the counter. I read for a while by the fire, then went to bed around 11. Again, I woke up in the middle of the night, this time to a distinct thump from above. I lay there, fully awake now, listening. Nothing for several minutes, then another thump, followed by what definitely sounded like shuffling movement. Just the wind, I told myself, but I didn't really believe it. The air was completely still outside. No branches were hitting the roof. I got up and grabbed the flashlight I kept by the bed. Standing in the main room, I stared up at that trapdoor, debating whether to check it out. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I reached for the string, then stopped. What if it was a raccoon or, worse, a bear that had somehow gotten in? I wasn't equipped to deal with either. I decided to wait until morning. When I returned to the kitchen to get some water, I noticed the spaghetti container was missing. I distinctly remembered leaving it on the counter. After searching everywhere, I found it in the sink, empty and rinsed out. Had I put it away and forgotten? I must have, but it didn't feel right. I was losing it out here in the silence. The next day, I drove into town for supplies. The closest place was a small general store about 20 minutes away. The older man behind the counter chatted with me as he rang up my items. "Staying at the Milner cabin?" he asked, eyeing my city clothes. "Yeah, just for a couple weeks," I replied. "Don't get many folks out there anymore, not since the Roberts boy went missing a few years back." My stomach dropped. "Missing?" The man waved dismissively. "Ah, he was a troubled kid. Ran away, most likely. They searched those woods for weeks. Never did find him." He must have noticed my expression because he quickly added, "But that's miles from where you're at. Nothing to worry about." That wasn't exactly comforting. On the drive back, I couldn't stop thinking about it. When I returned to the cabin, everything looked untouched, but I felt uneasy. I unloaded the groceries, making sure to put everything away properly this time. That night, I double-checked all the windows and the door before going to bed. I placed a chair against the front door, just in case. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of the chair scraping against the floor. I froze, listening intently. Nothing. When I finally worked up the courage to check, the chair was still exactly where I'd left it. But in the kitchen, a box of crackers I'd bought was open on the counter, crumbs scattered everywhere. I was absolutely certain I hadn't opened them yet. That's when I noticed small, dirty fingerprints on the edge of the counter. My blood ran cold. Someone had been in here while I was asleep. I grabbed my phone instinctively, forgetting there was no service. I needed to leave, but it was the middle of the night, pitch black outside, and I was miles from the nearest neighbor. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and sat with my back against the wall, watching the front door until dawn. As soon as there was enough light, I packed my essential belongings, ready to drive back to civilization. But as I was throwing things into my bag, I heard a distinct creaking from above, weight shifting on old boards. Something or someone was definitely in the attic. I don't know what possessed me, but instead of running straight to my car, I decided I needed to know what was up there. Maybe it was just some animal that had found its way in. I took the knife, stood on a chair beneath the trap door, and pulled the string. The door swung down, along with a folded ladder that clattered into place. Dust filled the air. Holding the flashlight in one shaking hand and the knife in the other, I climbed up. The attic was small. The ceiling sloped sharply with the roof line. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing storage boxes and old furniture covered in sheets. The air was stale and smelled faintly of something I couldn't identify, something unpleasant. In the far corner, partially hidden behind an old dresser, I saw what looked like a makeshift bed. Just some blankets and a pillow on the floor. Beside it were wrappers, an empty water bottle, and, my stomach lurched, the containers from food I'd been missing over the past few days. Someone had been living in the attic watching me, coming down at night to take food while I slept. I backed toward the ladder, trying not to make any noise. That's when I heard the front door of the cabin open and close. Whoever it was had been outside and was now back in the cabin, while I was trapped in the attic. I turned off my flashlight immediately, praying they wouldn't notice the open attic door. My heart was hammering so loudly I was sure it could be heard throughout the cabin. Minutes passed in complete silence. Had I imagined the door? I strained to listen for any sound below. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the main room. They stopped directly beneath the attic opening. I held my breath, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles hurt. The footsteps moved away toward the kitchen area. I heard cabinets opening, the fridge door. They were looking for food again. This was my chance. I could either stay hidden and hope they didn't come up to the attic, or I could try to make a run for my car. I chose to run. As quietly as possible, I crept to the ladder and started to descend. Halfway down, I could see into the kitchen area, and that's when I saw him. A man rail-thin and filthy with wild, matted hair and a patchy beard. He was hunched over the counter, eating cold beans straight from the can. I must have made some sound because he suddenly looked up. Our eyes met, and for a second, neither of us moved. His eyes were wide and almost feverish, his clothes tattered and stained. In his hand was a large hunting knife, much more substantial than my kitchen knife. He let out a sound that wasn't quite human, somewhere between a growl and a scream, and lunged toward me. I scrambled down the ladder, slipped on the last rung, and fell hard onto my back. The wind knocked out of me. I gasped for air as he closed in. Pure adrenaline got me to my feet. I threw the nearest object, a lamp, at him and bolted for the door. Behind me, I heard the crash as he stumbled over furniture in pursuit. I flung open the door and ran outside, not even taking time to close it behind me. The morning air was cold and sharp in my lungs as I sprinted toward my car. I could hear him behind me, branches snapping under his feet. My car key was in my pocket. I fumbled for it as I ran, nearly dropping it twice. I reached the car, hands shaking violently as I tried to get the key in the lock. He was getting closer. I could hear his ragged breathing now. The key finally turned and I threw myself inside, locking the doors just as he slammed against the driver's side window, that terrible knife scraping against the glass. His face was inches from mine, only the window between us. His eyes weren't just wild, they were completely unhinged, like something fundamental had broken inside him. He slammed the knife against the window again, and I saw a small crack form. I started the car and floored it, tires spinning in the dirt before finding traction. In my rearview mirror, I saw him running after the car until I hit the main dirt road and accelerated beyond his pursuit. I drove straight to the sheriff's office in the small town. They took my statement, looking increasingly concerned as I told my story. 2 deputies returned with me to the cabin later that day, guns drawn as they searched the property. They found the evidence in the attic, the makeshift bed, food wrappers, even clothes that weren't mine. But the man was gone. They discovered a small hole in the roof at the back of the cabin where he'd likely been entering and exiting when he went out to forage or hunt. The sheriff believed it was a homeless man, or possibly a drifter who'd been using the cabin as shelter for who knows how long. Maybe even the missing Roberts boy, now grown and living feral in the woods. They searched the surrounding forest for days but found nothing. I checked into a motel in town and drove back to the city the next morning. I never returned to the cabin, never even went back for the rest of my belongings. Sarah tried to reconcile when I got back, but how could I explain what had happened to me? How that experience had changed something fundamental in how I see the world. I can't stop thinking about how many nights I slept while he moved around above me, watching through the cracks in the ceiling. How many times he stood over me while I slept, knife in hand, deciding whether to kill me or just take my food. The thought of it makes me sick. I've moved into a ground floor apartment in a busy neighborhood. No attics, no crawl spaces, nowhere for anyone to hide. But sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I swear I can hear footsteps above me and the sound of someone breathing in the dark. Story 6. I've been debating whether to post this for years. It happened back in my sophomore year of college, almost 7 years ago now. My therapist actually suggested writing it down as part of processing it, but I couldn't bring myself to do it until now. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night. So my brother Tyler had just graduated from UVM, and his friend's family owned this lake house on the eastern shore of Lake Champlain, way out in rural Vermont. This was in late October, when the tourist season was long over and most of the neighboring properties were empty for the winter. Tyler invited me and 3 of my friends, Megan, Chris, and Alicia, to spend the weekend there as a sort of mini fall break vacation. The place was gorgeous but incredibly isolated. To reach it, we had to drive about 20 minutes down this winding dirt road surrounded by dense forest. The nearest neighbor was at least half a mile away, and the closest town was about 40 minutes by car. The house itself was beautiful, 2 stories with a huge deck overlooking the lake and woods all around. During the day, the isolation felt peaceful. By night, it was different. We arrived Friday afternoon around 4, unpacked, and spent the evening drinking, playing board games, and catching up. It was actually a really fun night. We all crashed pretty late, and Saturday morning we hiked a nearby trail and spent the afternoon exploring. Everything was totally normal until Saturday evening. Around 6, the sun was starting to set, and Megan and I were sitting on these Adirondack chairs on the lawn, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset over the lake. Tyler, Chris, and Alicia were inside preparing dinner. I remember feeling so relaxed, thinking how perfect everything was. The trees were all these amazing shades of orange and red. The air was crisp but not too cold, and the lake was so still it looked like glass. Then, out of nowhere, this feeling hit me. It's hard to describe accurately, but it was like all the hairs on my body stood up at once. A wave of dread washed over me, and I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I glanced at Megan and could tell she felt it too. She was sitting up straight, her wine glass frozen halfway to her mouth. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, and I just nodded. That's when we heard it. From somewhere in the forest behind the house came this chanting, male voices, lots of them, all perfectly synchronized. It wasn't in English or any language I recognized. The sound came in waves, rising and falling in this rhythmic pattern that was way too coordinated to be some drunken campers or hikers. I remember looking at Megan, both of us wide-eyed, before we grabbed our glasses and hurried inside. When we told the others, Chris laughed it off at first, suggesting it was probably just some campers having fun. But then the chanting grew louder, and we all went to the second-story deck to listen. Standing there, the 5 of us just froze. The chanting seemed to be coming from multiple locations in the forest, sometimes sounding distant and then alarmingly close, like they were circling the property. There was something deeply unsettling about the precision of it. Dozens of voices all chanting the exact same words with perfect timing. I've been in choirs. I know how hard it is to get even trained singers to sync up that perfectly. Tyler tried to joke that it was probably just a fraternity initiation or something, but his voice was shaky. None of us believed it. Whatever was happening out there wasn't normal. The sun had fully set by then, and the forest was pitch black. We couldn't see anything beyond the small area illuminated by the deck lights. The chanting continued for about 20 minutes, getting more intense and faster paced. I remember clutching the deck railing so hard my knuckles turned white. There was this energy in the air, heavy, oppressive, and unmistakably malevolent. I've never felt anything like it before or since. It was like the air itself had become thick with some kind of negative force. Then it suddenly stopped. The silence was almost as terrifying as the chanting. We all stood there, barely breathing, straining to hear anything. About 30 seconds of complete silence passed before we heard a singular voice shout something that sounded like a command. Then came the sound that still haunts my nightmares, a thunderous metallic bang, like a massive steel door slamming shut, followed immediately by the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. It was a man's voice, screaming in pure agony, the kind of scream that could only come from someone experiencing unimaginable pain. The scream lingered, echoing through the trees before abruptly cutting off. Then silence again. I felt physically sick. Alicia was crying quietly, and Chris had his arm around her. Megan was shaking. Tyler looked at me, and I'll never forget the expression on his face. This mixture of fear and the protective big brother look he'd give me when we were kids. "We should call the police," I whispered, but Tyler shook his head. "They wouldn't get here for at least an hour, and we have no idea where in the woods that came from. It could be miles away." Chris suggested we grab flashlights and check the edge of the property, but Megan immediately shot that down. "Are you insane? We're not splitting up or going outside. Haven't you seen horror movies?" We went back inside, locked every door and window, and stayed in the living room together. Nobody wanted to be alone. We tried to distract ourselves with a movie, but nobody was paying attention. Every few minutes, someone would mute the TV, and we'd all listen intently for any sounds from outside. Around 11, we heard it again. The chanting had resumed, but it sounded more distant now, like they were moving away from the house. It continued for maybe 5 minutes before fading completely. None of us slept that night. We stayed huddled in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. I kept thinking I saw movement outside the windows, shadows passing by, but when I'd look directly, there was nothing there. The worst part was the overwhelming certainty that we had heard something profoundly wrong, something that wasn't meant for outsiders to witness. I couldn't shake the feeling that if whatever was out there knew we had heard them, they would come for us. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, we packed our stuff in record time. Nobody mentioned staying for the rest of the weekend as originally planned. We just wanted to get out of there. As we were loading the cars, I walked to the edge of the yard and peered into the woods. In the daylight, it looked completely normal, just trees and underbrush, no sign of people, no paths, nothing to indicate what we'd heard the night before. But I couldn't shake this overwhelming sense that eyes were watching us from between the trees. During the drive back to campus, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was some kind of weird church retreat, maybe a theater group practicing outdoors, but deep down, none of us believed those explanations. The precision of the chanting, the clear intent behind it, that scream, it was all too orchestrated, too ritualistic. I've replayed that night in my head countless times, and I still regret not calling the police. What if that scream really was someone being hurt or worse? The forest around that lake is incredibly vast, hundreds of acres of dense woodland. Finding the exact location would have been nearly impossible, especially in the dark, but we should have at least reported it. Tyler called his friend a few weeks later and casually asked if anything strange had ever happened at the lake house. His friend laughed and said his grandmother used to talk about the old ones in the woods and how certain nights of the year they should stay inside with the curtains drawn. He'd always thought it was just superstitious nonsense. Tyler didn't tell him what we'd experienced. I've researched local folklore and history since then. There are old stories about certain parts of the Vermont forests being used for strange religious practices dating back to the colonial era. Some accounts mention groups that broke away from traditional churches to form their own sects, practicing rituals deemed heretical, but nothing specific about the area where we stayed. The 5 of us don't talk about that night much anymore. When we do get together, someone might make a vague reference to Vermont, and everyone goes quiet for a moment. It's like we've made an unspoken agreement to try to forget it. But I can't forget that scream. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night, certain I've just heard it again. I live in a city apartment now, surrounded by neighbors, and I still triple-check that my doors and windows are locked before bed. I'm not religious or superstitious, but that night at the lake house convinced me that there are things happening in this world that defy rational explanation. Whatever we heard in those woods was not meant for our ears, and sometimes I worry that by hearing it, we somehow became part of it, that whatever energy or intent was behind that ritual somehow marked us. It's been 7 years, and I've never gone back to Vermont. I don't think I ever will. Some places harbor secrets that should remain hidden, and whatever was in those woods that night is something I never want to encounter again. I still wonder about that scream sometimes. Was it a sacrifice, some kind of initiation, or something I don't even have the framework to understand? I'll probably never know the answer, and maybe that's for the best. But I'll never forget the feeling that washed over me when that chanting started, that bone-deep certainty that we were in the presence of something ancient and malevolent, something that was never meant to be witnessed by outsiders. Story 7. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but I need to get it off my chest. I still have nightmares about what happened, and writing it out might help me process everything. Maybe it'll also serve as a warning to others who are desperate for work like I was. About 8 months ago, I lost my job at a manufacturing company in Novaterra when they downsized. If you're not familiar with Novaterra, it's this mid-sized industrial city with factories everywhere. The job market here has always been competitive, but lately it's been absolutely brutal. For weeks, I was glued to my laptop applying for anything remotely related to my sales experience. LinkedIn, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, you name it, I'd submitted applications there. Every morning I'd wake up hoping for interview requests, only to find rejection emails or nothing at all. My savings were dwindling fast, and the pressure to find something was crushing me. After about 3 weeks of nothing, I started expanding my search to less familiar job sites. I was getting desperate and figured I couldn't afford to ignore any potential leads. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon when an email notification popped up on my phone. The subject line read, "Urgent, sales position interview request." My heart jumped. Finally, someone was interested. The email was from a guy named Zach Miller, who introduced himself as a regional manager for some sales company I'd never heard of. He mentioned that he was impressed with my resume and wanted to interview me that same evening at 7. I remember feeling a mixture of excitement and unease. The rushed timeline seemed odd, but then again, I'd heard of companies needing to fill positions quickly. The salary he mentioned was about 20% higher than what I'd made at my previous job, which made it even more tempting. Against my better judgment, I replied, accepting the interview. Zach sent a confirmation email with an address on the outskirts of the industrial park. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching the company, but found surprisingly little information online. They had a basic website that looked legitimate enough, but something about it felt off, like it had been thrown together recently. Still, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. I left my house at 6:30, wanting to arrive early to make a good impression. The address led me to a small, unmarked building tucked between 2 larger warehouses. The parking lot was completely empty, and all the lights inside were off. My stomach immediately knotted up. This wasn't right. I double-checked the address on my phone. I was definitely in the right place. Maybe I was early? I decided to wait in my car, watching the building for any signs of activity. By 6:45, no one had arrived. I tried calling the number from the email, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message saying I was outside and waited some more. By 7:15, with still no sign of anyone, the reality sank in. There was no interview, no job. I felt angry, embarrassed, and a little scared. Why would someone go through the trouble of setting up a fake interview? Was it just some sick joke? I drove home, repeatedly calling the number, but never getting an answer. When I got home around 7:30, I cracked open a beer and collapsed on my couch, mentally exhausted. I resolved to stick with reputable job sites from then on, no matter how desperate I got. Every now and then, I'd hear creaking coming from upstairs, but my house is old, and I've gotten used to the weird noises it makes when the temperature changes. I didn't think anything of it. I finished my beer, watched some mindless TV to distract myself, and headed to bed around 10. I fell asleep almost immediately. Emotional exhaustion will do that to you. I'm not sure how long I slept before I woke up. The room was pitch black, and for a moment I wasn't sure what had pulled me from sleep. Then I heard it, that same creaking sound from earlier, but closer, much closer, inside my bedroom. At first I thought I was dreaming, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized with growing horror that my closet door was slowly opening. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. It was like my body was paralyzed while my mind screamed in terror. A figure emerged from the closet, a human shape moving with deliberate, careful steps. I could make out the silhouette of a man, tall and thin, advancing toward my bed. The moment seemed to stretch forever, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might explode. Finally, some survival instinct kicked in. I lunged for my phone on the nightstand, fumbling in the dark. The sudden movement startled the intruder, who froze momentarily. That split second was all I needed. I grabbed my phone and bolted from the bedroom, nearly falling down the stairs in my panic. I didn't stop running until I was outside on my front lawn. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. I still remember exactly what I told the dispatcher. "Someone's in my house. He was in my closet. He was watching me sleep. Please hurry." The dispatcher told me to go to a neighbor's house, but I refused. I was terrified the intruder would escape before police arrived, so I stood across the street, watching my front door like a hawk, ready to yell which way he ran if he came out. Those minutes waiting for the police were the longest of my life. Every shadow looked like him. Every sound made me jump. When the police cruisers finally pulled up with their lights flashing, I felt a wave of relief so intense my knees almost buckled. 2 officers approached me, while others entered my house with their weapons drawn. I remember one officer staying with me, asking questions I could barely focus on answering. After what seemed like forever, an officer radioed that they had found someone hiding in my bathroom. My bathroom. The thought made me physically sick. They brought him out in handcuffs, and when I saw him under the streetlights, my blood ran cold. The man looked nothing like a normal person. He was gaunt, almost skeletal, with long, greasy hair hanging past his shoulders. But it was his eyes that haunted me, wide, unblinking, with a disturbing intensity as he stared directly at me. I had to look away. It felt like he was trying to memorize my face. The detective who interviewed me later revealed the horrifying truth. The man had created hundreds of fake job listings across dozens of websites. He'd gotten my information from my resume submission and knew exactly when I would leave for the interview. He had broken into my house while I was gone and had been hiding there for hours. Hours. While I drank my beer, while I watched TV, while I slept. He had been just feet away from me all that time. They found a backpack in my closet containing duct tape, zip ties, a knife, and several syringes filled with some kind of sedative. The detective said they believed he had targeted at least 3 other job seekers in neighboring cities using the same method. I was apparently his 4th target. The worst part? During questioning, he refused to say what he had planned to do to me. He just smiled that unnervingly calm smile and said nothing. The police assured me he would be locked away for a long time, but that doesn't erase the question that keeps me up at night. What was he going to do to me? I've moved twice since then. I've changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts, and removed my resume from every job site I can remember using. I found a new job through a friend's recommendation, thankfully. I check my locks compulsively now, and I've installed a security system that would make a bank jealous. But none of that helps when I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear my closet door creaking open. None of that erases the image of that man standing in my bedroom, watching me sleep, waiting for whatever sick moment he had planned. The police never found out who Zach Miller really was. The email was sent through a temporary account, and the phone number was a burner. The company website disappeared the next day. It was all an elaborate trap set by a predator who knew exactly how to exploit desperate job seekers. So if you're job hunting and get an interview request that seems too good to be true, especially if it's rushed or at an odd location, please be careful. I got lucky. I woke up, but I still don't know why he was waiting, or what made him decide that was the moment to come out of my closet. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't heard that creak, if I hadn't grabbed my phone in time. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if there are others who weren't as lucky as me, people who never got the chance to tell their stories. I'm still jumping at shadows, still sleeping with the lights on, still checking my closet before bed like a frightened child, and I'm still haunted by those unblinking eyes staring at me from the back seat of the police car, somehow communicating without words that our encounter wasn't over. That's my story. I don't know if sharing it helps anyone, but maybe it will make someone think twice before rushing to an interview that doesn't feel right. Trust your instincts. They might just save your life. Story 8. I still get chills thinking about it. It's been 11 years now, but there are some things you just can't unsee, you know? I was 19 back in 2013. Living with my parents in Mastic Beach on Long Island. If you're not familiar with the area, well, let's just say it's not the nicest part of Long Island. High crime rates, rundown houses, that sort of thing. But we had a beach, and even though it wasn't anything fancy like the ones in the Hamptons, it was still a beach. That summer, I had just gotten my learner's permit. Yeah, I know, kind of late, but I never really needed to drive before then. My parents both worked long hours, and on this particular day in July, I decided I'd take my dad's old Corolla and head to the beach by myself. It was a Tuesday, middle of the day, and I figured the beach would be empty. Perfect time to just relax and clear my head. I remember it was hot, really hot. The kind of humid heat that makes your clothes stick to your skin the moment you step outside. I parked in the nearly empty lot. There were maybe 2 other cars there, probably belonging to the beach maintenance people, though they rarely did much maintaining. The place was always littered with cigarette butts, empty beer cans, and other trash. I grabbed my beach chair, a towel, and a small cooler with some sandwiches and soda. Didn't bother with sunscreen even though my skin's pretty pale. Stupid, I know, but that would soon be the least of my problems. The beach was completely deserted when I arrived. Just stretches of dirty sand, some seaweed washed up on shore, and the sound of waves. I set up my chair about 20 feet from the water, stuck my phone in my pocket, and just sat there for a while, watching the waves and feeling the breeze. It was peaceful, despite the grungy surroundings. After maybe half an hour of just sitting there, I started getting antsy. Decided to take a walk along the shoreline, just to stretch my legs. The sand was hot between my toes, but the water felt nice when it washed over my feet. I headed east, away from the parking lot, toward a more secluded area where the beach curved slightly. I must have been walking for about 10 minutes when I first noticed the smell. At first, I thought maybe it was just rotting seaweed. That happens a lot on our beaches, especially when it's hot. But as I kept walking, the smell got stronger. It was like, God, it's hard to describe. Like meat left out in the sun for days. Sickly sweet, but also sharp like ammonia. The kind of smell that makes your stomach turn instantly. I actually covered my nose with my t-shirt and was about to turn back when my foot hit something. It wasn't like stepping on a shell or a rock. It had give to it, but also resistance. Hard, but yielding. And there was something else. Something that felt like wet hair brushing against my ankle. I looked down, and at first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was partially buried in the sand, with just the top portion exposed. Brown, grayish hair, matted with something dark and crusted. I thought maybe it was some kind of dead animal, a raccoon or possum that had washed up. I'm not sure what made me keep looking. Curiosity, I guess, the stupidest human instinct. I nudged it with my foot, trying to see what it was without actually touching it with my hands. When it rolled slightly, revealing what it was, I swear my heart stopped. It was a human head, a fucking human head, severed at the neck. An elderly woman, probably in her 60s, with thin gray-brown hair, her face, Jesus Christ. Her eyes were wide open, bloodshot and bulging, like they were about to pop out of their sockets. Her mouth was stretched in this horrible grimace, like she was screaming when she died. The worst part was her expression. It wasn't just fear, it was pure terror, frozen forever on her face. And her skin had this greenish-gray tint, bloated in some places, sunken in others. There were these dark marks along her neck where it had been cut. Not clean either, jagged and torn. I don't remember screaming, but I must have because my throat was raw afterward. I stumbled backward, tripped over my own feet and fell hard on my ass. Then I scrambled up and just ran. I ran like I've never run before, my feet slipping in the sand, my lungs burning. When I got back to my chair, I doubled over and threw up. Everything I'd eaten that day came up in violent heaves. My whole body was shaking so bad I could barely stand. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911 with trembling fingers, leaving sandy, wet prints on the screen. The dispatcher kept trying to calm me down, but I was hysterical. "There's a head, a woman's head, on the beach." I kept repeating it, like saying it more would somehow make it less real. She told me to go to my car and wait there, to lock the doors and not talk to anyone until the police arrived. It took them about 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. The whole time I sat there, I kept seeing that face, those eyes staring at nothing. I kept thinking about how she was someone's mother, someone's wife, maybe someone's grandmother, and someone had cut her head off and tossed it on a beach like garbage. When the police arrived, there were 2 patrol cars at first, then more came. They took my statement right there in the parking lot. I remember one officer, this middle-aged guy with a mustache, kept asking me if I was sure about what I'd seen, like I'd somehow mistaken a human head for something else. But when another officer came back from checking out the spot I described, the mustache guy's face changed. He got real serious and told me I needed to go to the station to give a formal statement. At the station, they put me in this small room and had me go over everything multiple times. They asked if I'd touched the head. I hadn't, except with my foot. If I'd seen anyone else on the beach. I hadn't. If I'd noticed anything unusual in the parking lot. I hadn't. A detective showed up later. Detective Ramirez, I think her name was. She was calmer than the others, more methodical. She told me they'd closed off the beach and that I'd done the right thing by calling right away. Then she asked me something that made my blood run cold. Did you see anyone watching you while you were at the beach? Anyone following you on your walk? The idea that the person who'd done this might have been there, watching me discover their handiwork, made me feel sick all over again. I hadn't seen anyone, but suddenly every shadow, every distant figure I might have glimpsed out of the corner of my eye seemed sinister. They finally let me go around 6 in the evening. My parents came to pick me up. The police had called them. My mom cried the whole way home, kept hugging me like she thought I might disappear. My dad was quiet, but I could tell he was rattled. He kept checking the rearview mirror, like he thought someone might be following us. For the next few days, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those terrified eyes. I'd jerk awake, my heart racing, convinced someone was in my room. My parents suggested I talk to someone, so I started seeing a therapist. She said I had PTSD, which wasn't surprising. The beach was closed for almost a week while they investigated. The local news covered it, of course. That's how I learned her name, Diane Ross, 63 years old. She'd lived about 5 miles from the beach in a small apartment by herself. No one had reported her missing because she didn't have much family and kept to herself. The news said she'd been stabbed in the back of the neck, then decapitated post-mortem. They found her body 3 days later in a dumpster behind a strip mall. The worst part? They never caught who did it. The case went cold after a few months. I couldn't stay in Mastic Beach after that. Every time I drove past a beach, I'd have a panic attack. My parents understood, and we moved about 6 months later to a safer area in Nassau County, a wealthier neighborhood with lower crime rates and beaches that were actually maintained. It's been 11 years now, and I still can't go to the beach without feeling sick. I still dream about her sometimes, Diane Ross, a woman I never knew in life, but whose death became this defining moment for me. Sometimes I wonder if the killer is still out there, if they still live in Mastic Beach, if they've killed others. The cops told me it was just bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. But I've always wondered if there was more to it. Why that beach? Why that day? Was it random, or was there some sick purpose behind leaving her head there for someone to find? I tried looking up the case a few years ago, but there wasn't much information, just that it remains unsolved. Detective Ramirez retired. The beach reopened. Life went on for everyone except Diane Ross. And in some ways, for me too. I'm 30 now. I have a decent job, my own place, even a girlfriend who understands why I suggest mountains instead of beaches for vacations. But there are still nights when I wake up in a cold sweat. feeling the weight of something against my foot, smelling that horrible smell, seeing those eyes staring at me accusingly, like I should have somehow done more than just run away screaming. I don't know if I'll ever get over it completely. How do you process something like that? Finding a severed human head on what should have been just another boring summer day? I don't think you do. You just learn to live with it, to push it down deep enough that it doesn't paralyze you. But it's always there, just beneath the surface. And sometimes, when I catch a certain smell or see a certain shade of gray-brown hair, it all comes rushing back. And I'm 19 again, standing on that dirty beach in Mastic, my life forever changed by what washed up on the shore. Story 9. I never thought I'd be sharing this with strangers, but I need to get this off my chest. 5 years ago, I bought a cabin in upstate New York after getting completely burned out from my marketing job in Manhattan. The daily grind, the people, the noise, it was killing me slowly. I needed space to breathe, to think, to just exist without someone constantly demanding something from me. The cabin was perfect, nestled deep in the woods, about 40 minutes from the nearest proper town. My closest neighbor was thousands of feet away, which was exactly what I wanted. The realtor kept apologizing about the isolation factor, like it was some kind of defect. For me, it was the main selling point. The place itself wasn't anything fancy. 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, and this amazing deck that wrapped around half the house. That deck quickly became my sanctuary. Every evening after work, I started freelancing from home. I'd grab a beer from the fridge, sit out there and just watch the sunset through the trees. The sky would turn this incredible shade of orange, then purple, and finally deep blue as night set in. Then the forest sounds would start. Owls, distant coyotes, the wind rustling through leaves. It was better than any white noise machine you could buy. For 5 years, it was paradise. I'd gotten to know the sounds of my forest, the way the house creaked when the temperature dropped, how the branches of the old oak tree would scratch against the roof during windy nights, the regular visits from deer in my yard at dawn. It was home in a way my apartment in the city never was. But 2 weeks ago, everything changed. It started with some unusual noises. At first, I brushed them off. Just forest sounds, right? But there was something different about these. Snapping twigs that seemed too deliberate. Rustling that didn't match the wind patterns. It's hard to explain unless you've lived somewhere long enough to know its rhythms. But something felt off. 3 nights after I first noticed the strange sounds, I was reading in bed around 11:30 when I heard it. A soft scratching sound right outside my bedroom window. Not the familiar scratch of tree branches, but something more purposeful, like fingernails slowly dragging across the glass. I froze, book in hand, straining to hear. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. I got up, pulled back the curtain, and shined my flashlight out the window. Nothing, just darkness and trees. I checked all the doors and windows before going back to bed, telling myself it was probably just a raccoon or something. The next night, it was tapping. 3 light taps on my bedroom window around the same time. Tap, 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 like someone trying to get my attention. Again, I grabbed my flashlight, checked outside, found nothing. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't before, footprints in the soft dirt beneath my window. They were partially obscured, like someone had tried to brush them away, but they were definitely there. I didn't sleep that night. Kept my hunting knife on the nightstand and my phone in my hand, ready to call for help. But who would come? The nearest sheriff's station was 25 minutes away on a good day. The third night, I set up my laptop to record the sounds. I needed proof I wasn't imagining things. Around midnight, the tapping started again, but this time it moved. From my bedroom window to the living room window, then to the kitchen. Like whatever it was circling my house, testing each entrance. The recording picked it up, that methodical tap, tap, tap moving around my home's perimeter. By the fourth night, the sounds had changed. Now I was hearing creaks inside the house, not the normal settling sounds I was used to, but new ones. Creaks that sounded like weight shifting on floorboards. I swear I heard breathing once, coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I called out, threatened to call the police, said I had a gun. I didn't. The sounds stopped immediately. The fifth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a crowbar from my toolbox and decided to search every inch of my house. I checked under beds, in closets, behind furniture. Nothing in the main areas. But when I got to the spare bedroom, the one I never used except for storage, I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. I always kept it closed. Heart pounding, I approached the closet, crowbar raised. When I pulled the door open fully, I found something that made my blood run cold. A small piece of dark cloth, torn and caught on a nail that was sticking out from the wall inside the closet. Someone had been in there. Someone had been hiding in my house. I ran outside, got in my car, and drove to the nearest gas station with my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I called the sheriff's office from there. They sent someone out, but of course they found nothing. No signs of forced entry. Just that piece of cloth, which they said could have been there for ages. The deputy suggested it might be my own clothing that got caught, even though I told him I never used that closet. He clearly thought I was overreacting, just another city person spooked by the normal sounds of rural life. I almost believed him, almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. I went back home, installed new deadbolts on all the doors, and put wooden dowels in all the window tracks so they couldn't be opened from outside. The sixth night was quiet. No tapping, no scratching. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe whatever it was had moved on. Then came the seventh night. I was sitting on my deck, trying to reclaim my evening ritual. The sun had just set and I was nursing a beer, telling myself everything was fine. That's when I heard rustling in the trees at the edge of my property, more deliberate than wind or animals. I stood up, heart racing again. "Who's there?" I shouted. "I've called the police. They're on their way." Silence, then movement. Just a slight shifting of shadows about 50 feet into the tree line. I went inside, grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy-duty ones that could double as a weapon, and, against all better judgment, headed back out. I was angry now. This was my home, my sanctuary. I wasn't going to be terrorized. I marched toward where I'd seen the movement, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "I know you're there," I yelled. "Show yourself." That's when I saw it. About 30 feet ahead, partially hidden behind a thick tree trunk, was a figure. The beam of my flashlight caught what looked like the lower half of a person, dark pants, boots. As I moved the light up, the figure stepped back, keeping most of itself obscured by the tree. But I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach drop. A pale face, mostly hidden by a dark hood or hat, with eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. I ran back to the house, slammed and locked the door behind me, and immediately called 911. The dispatcher promised to send someone, but said it would take at least 20 minutes. I was told to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and wait. Those 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat in my living room, back against the wall, crowbar in one hand, phone in the other. Every creak, every sound outside made me jump. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, inside my house. Slow, deliberate steps coming toward the living room where I was hiding. I didn't think, I just reacted. I went for the deck door, fumbled with the lock with shaking hands, and ran. Straight into the forest in the opposite direction from where I'd seen the figure earlier. I ran blindly through trees and underbrush, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me. I only stopped when I saw police lights in the distance flashing through the trees. I changed course, heading toward them, shouting for help. The police found nothing in my house, no signs of entry, no footprints besides my own. They searched the surrounding woods with flashlights but came up empty. One officer suggested maybe I'd heard a raccoon in the attic. Another exchanged a look with his partner that clearly communicated what he thought. Just another city person having a nervous breakdown in the woods. I never went back to the cabin. I grabbed some clothes and essentials the next day, with a deputy standing by, and checked into a motel in town. Called the sheriff's office a few days later to let them know I was safe, that I'd be staying with friends for a while. That was 2 weeks ago. My cabin is still sitting there, empty in the woods. I've thought about selling it, but I can't bring myself to list it yet. Can't bring myself to go back either. Sometimes at night I still hear that tapping sound in my dreams. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone trying to get my attention. Like someone letting me know they're still there, waiting. I don't know who was in my house or what they wanted. I don't know if they're still hanging around my empty cabin. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that whoever or whatever it was, they're still out there somewhere. And sometimes I swear I can feel eyes watching me even now. Story 10. I still can't explain what happened that night. It's been 10 years, and I've tried to rationalize it countless times, but I can't. I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me for too long. Back when I was 17, my friends and I discovered this weird abandoned concrete structure in the woods behind Jake's house. It was me, Jake, Mikey, and Dylan. We were just normal high school kids looking for somewhere to hang out away from parents and rules. Jake had just moved to this house that backed up to this massive stretch of woods, and we were all excited to explore it. I remember it was late October, and the weather had just started to get that real autumn chill. We were wandering around these woods for maybe an hour when Dylan spotted something through the trees. This gray concrete wall that seemed totally out of place among all the trees and brush. We pushed through some thorny bushes to reach it and discovered it was some kind of old foundation or bunker or something. Most of the roof was gone, but the walls were still standing, about 8 feet high in most places. The whole structure was maybe 30 feet by 40 feet, with what looked like it had once been different rooms, though most of the interior walls had crumbled. "Dude, what is this place?" I asked Jake, since it was technically on his property. He just shrugged and said his parents never mentioned anything about a structure in the woods when they bought the place. We spent that whole afternoon clearing out brush and making it into our own little hideout. We swept away years of dead leaves, pulled out the saplings that had started growing inside, and created this cool little hangout spot. There was one intact doorway and a couple of spots where the walls had partially collapsed that we could squeeze through. By late afternoon, we'd even gathered rocks to make a fire pit in what we decided was the main room. As it got darker, we built a small campfire. It wasn't huge, just enough to give us light and keep us warm. The flames cast these crazy shadows on the concrete walls, making the place feel almost ancient. We had brought some beers, stolen from Jake's dad's garage fridge, and we're just talking shit and feeling like kings of our own little castle. Around 9 o'clock, I needed to take a piss. I didn't want to go right outside our hideout because, well, that's gross if we're hanging out there regularly. So I told the guys I was going to walk back toward Jake's house a bit. "Don't get lost, dumbass," Mikey laughed, tossing me his flashlight. It was one of those heavy metal ones that could probably knock someone out if you hit them with it. I flipped him off and headed out through the main entrance. The moon was nearly full that night, but once I got under the tree cover, it got really dark really fast. The flashlight beam barely cut through the thickness of the woods. I walked maybe 100 yards from our spot, just far enough that the glow from our campfire was no longer visible. I found a good spot by a thick oak tree and started doing my business. That's when I first felt something was off. The woods had gone completely silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just dead silence except for the sound of me peeing. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft at first, like someone stepping carefully on the carpet of leaves that covered the forest floor. I froze, my heart immediately beginning to pound in my chest. The footsteps stopped too. I told myself it was just an animal, a deer maybe. I quickly finished up, zipped my pants, and turned in a slow circle, shining the flashlight around me. Nothing but trees and shadows. I started walking back toward our hideout, moving faster than before. After about 10 steps, I heard it again. Footsteps, matching my pace, but slightly out of sync, like they were deliberately trying to disguise themselves by stepping when I stepped. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed, they slowed too, but always with that slight delay. I stopped abruptly. The footsteps continued for exactly 2 more steps before stopping too. My mouth went completely dry. I wasn't imagining this. Something or someone was following me. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking embarrassingly. No response. I swung the flashlight wildly around me, but the beam only reached so far into the darkness. The naked tree branches above me swayed slightly in the breeze, creating moving shadows that made it impossible to tell if anything was actually there. "Jake? Mikey? Dylan? This isn't funny, guys," I shouted, hoping it was just my friends playing a stupid prank. Nothing, just the soft sound of wind through the branches. I started walking again, faster now, almost jogging. The footsteps returned immediately, matching my increased pace. They sounded closer now, like they were gaining on me. I broke into a full run, no longer caring about direction, just wanting to get back to the safety of our hideout and my friends. I could see the faint glow of our campfire through the trees. Now. I sprinted toward it, branches whipping at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. I swear I could feel breath on the back of my neck, but I didn't dare turn around. I burst through the entrance of our concrete structure, gasping for breath. My 3 friends looked up at me, startled. "What the hell, man?" Jake asked, standing up. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Someone's out there," I panted, pointing back toward the woods. "Someone followed me. I could hear their footsteps." Dylan laughed. "You're such a pussy. It was probably just a raccoon or something." "No," I insisted, still struggling to catch my breath. It matched my pace. When I stopped, it stopped. It was following me. Mikey, always the skeptic, rolled his eyes. "You've been watching too many horror movies, dude." I was about to argue when we all heard it, a metallic scraping sound from outside the walls, like metal dragging across concrete. We all froze. Jake put his finger to his lips. The sound came again, closer this time. It was moving around the perimeter of our structure. "What was that about a raccoon?" I whispered to Dylan, who had gone pale. "Probably just the wind knocking a branch against the wall," Jake whispered back, but I could tell he didn't believe it. Mikey stood up slowly and moved toward one of the broken sections of wall to peek out. As he got close, something hit the wall from the outside with enough force to send dust and small chunks of concrete raining down. Mikey jumped back like he'd been shocked. "Fuck this," he hissed. "Let's get out of here." We quickly kicked dirt over our fire to extinguish it, grabbed our backpacks, and huddled together in the sudden darkness. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. "We shouldn't go out the front entrance," Jake whispered. "If someone's out there, that's where they'll be waiting." We all nodded in agreement and moved toward the back of the structure, where part of the wall had collapsed, creating a narrow gap barely wide enough for us to squeeze through one at a time. Dylan, being the skinniest, went first, then Mikey. I went next, scraping my shoulder painfully on the rough concrete as I pushed through. Jake came last, and I heard him curse under his breath as he got stuck momentarily before forcing his way through. We were now on the opposite side of the structure from the main entrance, facing a dense section of woods. "Jake's house is that way," Dylan whispered, pointing to our right. "If we cut through these trees, we'll hit the back of his yard in about 5 minutes." We started moving as quietly as possible, staying close together. The brush was thick here, and we had to push our way through, the branches scratching at our arms and faces. Every snap of a twig beneath our feet sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. We'd made it about 50 yards when we heard it. Deliberate footsteps behind us, moving quickly through the brush, not even trying to be stealthy anymore. "Run!" Jake shouted, and we all took off, crashing through the underbrush with no attempt at stealth now. The footsteps behind us sped up too. Whoever it was, they were running after us now. I could hear branches breaking and leaves crunching as they charged through the forest. We broke through the tree line onto the road that ran alongside the woods, gasping for breath. I felt a surge of relief at being in the open again, under the moonlight, away from the claustrophobic darkness of the trees. We all turned back toward the woods, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the trees, tall, wearing what looked like a dark hoodie. The face was completely shadowed, but I could feel their eyes on us. They just stood there, perfectly still, watching us from the darkness. None of us said a word. We just turned and ran toward Jake's house, not stopping until we were inside with the door locked behind us. We spent the rest of the night in Jake's basement with all the lights on, jumping at every sound, telling Jake's parents we were just having a sleepover. We never went back to that concrete structure. In fact, Jake's family moved away a few months later for unrelated reasons. I drove by the house once, years later, and stared into those woods, feeling a chill run down my spine at the memory. To this day, I don't know who was following us that night or why. Was it someone who used that abandoned structure as a hideout themselves? A hunter? Some psycho who stalked teenagers in the woods? I'll never know. But sometimes when I'm walking alone at night, I still catch myself listening for footsteps behind me, steps that match my pace but are just slightly out of sync, and I still feel watched whenever I'm near dense woods. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe we let our teenage imaginations run wild that night, but I don't think so. Someone was there in those woods, following us, watching us. And sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, waiting for someone else to stumble upon that crumbling concrete sanctuary in the forest. Story 11. I still think about that day at Lake Runsjön, and my hands shake whenever I try to talk about it. I've been a fishing supervisor in northern Sweden for almost 19 years now, monitoring fish populations, checking permits, and yes, getting in plenty of my own fishing too. It's the perfect job for someone like me, who's always loved the solitude of our forests. Until that day 3 summers ago, I'd never once felt unsafe in the wilderness. Lake Runchon isn't on most maps. It's this perfectly circular body of water about 20 kilometers from the nearest road, hidden deep in the pine forests north of Östersund. Most locals don't even know it exists. I discovered it during an aerial survey 7 years ago, and it quickly became my favorite spot for catching brown trout. The lake's unusual circular shape made me curious from the start, almost too perfect to be natural, but the fishing was extraordinary. That day in July started like any other fishing trip. I had packed light, my 5-weight fly rod, a small tackle box, some sandwiches, and a thermos of coffee. I parked at the old logging road and hiked the 2 hours through dense forest to reach the lake. It was warm for northern Sweden, maybe 22 degrees Celsius, with just enough cloud cover to keep the trout active. I arrived around 5 in the afternoon. The conditions couldn't have been more perfect. A light breeze rippling the surface, and I could already see trout rising near the eastern shore. I set up at my usual spot, a small clearing where the forest comes within a few meters of the water. The lake isn't large, maybe 300 meters across, but incredibly deep for its size. The first hour was productive. I caught and released 4 decent-sized trout using a small elk hair caddis pattern that was working brilliantly. The evening light was starting to turn golden, filtering through the pines and casting long shadows across the water. I remember feeling completely at peace. At around 7, I spotted a large trout rising repeatedly about 20 meters out. I changed my fly to a slightly larger pattern and began working out more line for the cast. That's when I first felt something odd. The forest behind me, which had been filled with birdsong and the rustling of leaves, suddenly went silent. Not gradually quiet, absolutely silent, like someone had pressed a mute button on the world. I paused mid-cast, the line hanging in the air. The breeze that had been constant all evening just stopped. The surface of the lake, which moments before had been textured with small ripples, turned mirror smooth in seconds. I remember thinking it was strange, but told myself it was just one of those momentary lulls that happen sometimes. I completed my cast, and the fly landed perfectly above where the trout had been rising. The moment it touched the water, everything changed. The sun, which had been warm on my back, vanished behind a bank of clouds that hadn't been there seconds before. The temperature plummeted, not gradually, but instantly, dropping what felt like 10 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in a visible cloud, which made no sense for July in Sweden. Then the smell hit me. It's hard to describe, but imagine the worst decay you've ever smelled, like something long dead but somehow still rotting. It seemed to rise from the ground itself, so strong I had to fight the urge to gag. I started to reel in my line, wanting nothing more than to pack up and leave when I felt it. Something was behind me in the forest. Not a bear or moose or any animal I'd encountered in my decades outdoors. Something else, something watching me. I couldn't turn around. I physically couldn't make my body turn to look. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I stood frozen, rod still in my hands, fly sinking unused into the now glassy water. The presence, I don't know what else to call it, was maybe 15 meters behind me in the tree line. I could feel its attention focused on me like a physical weight. The hair on my arms and neck stood straight up, and a cold sweat broke out across my back despite the unnatural chill. Time became meaningless. I don't know if I stood there for 2 minutes or 20. My muscles were locked rigid, and I remember noticing with detached horror that I'd dropped my rod, but my hands were still frozen in the position of holding it. I stared straight ahead at the lake, afraid that any movement might trigger something. The fear was unlike anything I've ever known. Not the adrenaline rush of a close call or the startle of something unexpected. This was primal terror, the kind that turns your thoughts primitive and makes you feel like prey. The kind that makes you understand why our ancestors feared the dark. Though I never saw it directly, I somehow knew certain things about what was watching me. It was tall, it was ancient, and it was deciding what to do with me. My peripheral vision, all I could manage, caught movement at the edge of the lake. The water near the shore began to recede, pulling back from the edges as if being drawn toward the center, exposing muddy bottom that should have been submerged. Yet the lake level directly in front of me remained unchanged. It was as if the water itself was trying to get away from whatever stood behind me. The only sound was my own heartbeat thundering in my ears and my shallow, rapid breathing. Even the normal sounds of water lapping at the shore were gone because the water had gone still as glass. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the presence vanished. I felt its attention withdraw like a physical release. The sun broke through non-existent clouds, warming my back again. Birds erupted into song all at once, not gradually, but as if they'd been there singing all along, and I'd just been unable to hear them. The breeze returned, rippling the now normal lake surface, and the putrid smell disappeared completely. I didn't wait to see what might happen next. I left everything, my expensive fly rod, tackle box, backpack with my phone and car keys inside, and ran. I crashed through the forest, not caring about the branches whipping my face or the roots threatening to trip me. I ran without stopping, without looking back, in what I hoped was the direction of my car. By some miracle, I actually found the logging road. I had spare keys hidden under my car wheel well, an old habit from years of dropping things in lakes. And I drove like a madman back to town, not slowing until I saw other houses, other people. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. I told no one what happened. Who would believe me? I made up a story about getting spooked by a bear to explain abandoning my gear. 2 colleagues volunteered to go retrieve my things, and I gave them directions while fighting waves of nausea at the thought of them going there. When they returned with all my equipment, exactly where I'd left it, they mentioned nothing unusual except how good the fishing was. Here's what troubles me most. I've worked in Swedish forests all my life. I've encountered bears a dozen times, faced down aggressive moose, gotten lost in sudden fog. I know the natural dangers of our wilderness, but in all my years, the only place I've ever felt truly afraid of encountering a bear was Lake Runshun, and I realize now that was my mind trying to rationalize an instinctive fear of something that had nothing to do with bears. I've checked historical records and discovered 3 things that keep me awake at night. First, Lake Runshun doesn't appear on maps older than 80 years. Second, its perfect circular shape matches no natural lake formation process. And third, there's an old Sami legend about a place in these forests where the old ones still come through, a place described as a perfect eye in the forest. I've never gone back, and I never will. Whatever was watching me that day, whatever decided to let me go, is still there, waiting in the trees beside a perfectly round lake that shouldn't exist. Story 12. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family. Even typing this makes my hands shake a little. It happened when I was 7, but the memory is burned into my mind like it was yesterday, even though I shouldn't remember it at all. We were driving to my grandparents' house in Pine Cliff County. It was a long trip, about 6 hours from our home in Roseville. Mom and Richard, my stepdad, wanted to make the drive overnight to avoid traffic. Richard had this blue Chevy Impala that I remember so clearly. The worn leather seats, the little pine air freshener hanging from the mirror, and the way the dashboard glowed green in the darkness. My little brother Kyle was 5, and my sister Emma was 9. We were all crammed in the back seat with pillows and blankets, surrounded by snacks and our Game Boys that had long since died. It must have been around 11 at night. I remember drifting in and out of sleep, my head against the cool window, watching the occasional lights from passing cars or distant farmhouses flash by in the darkness. The radio was playing softly, some oldies station that Richard always listened to. I remember hearing Dreams by Fleetwood Mac right before it happened. It's weird, the details that stick with you. Highway 43 through Pine Cliff County is absolutely desolate. It cuts through dense forest for miles, with these rolling hills that make it feel like you're on a roller coaster. No streetlights, no gas stations, nothing but trees and occasional clearings. The moon was nearly full that night, casting this eerie silver glow over everything. I was almost asleep when I felt the car slow down. Not like when you're approaching a town or a stop sign. It was more urgent. Richard muttered something to my mom, and then I heard her gasp. The sound jolted me awake. I sat up and leaned forward between the front seats. "Richard, what are they doing out here?" Mom's voice was tight, strained. I looked through the windshield, and that's when I saw them. 2 small figures standing in the middle of the highway. At first, I thought they were deer, but as we got closer, I could see they were shaped like children, like girls. But they weren't normal. They were glowing, not reflecting our headlights like reflective clothing would. They were actually giving off light, this yellowish-white light that seemed to come from within them. They were holding hands, standing perfectly still in our lane. "Don't swerve," Richard said firmly to my mom, who was clutching the dashboard. "I'm going to slow down steady." The car decelerated, and I pressed my face closer to the gap between the seats. Emma was still asleep, but Kyle had woken up and was whimpering beside me. Visal, glowing figures had no faces, no features at all. They were just silhouettes filled with light, like someone had cut child-shaped holes in reality and pure light was pouring through from somewhere else. I remember thinking they looked like the paper dolls Emma and I used to make, but made of light instead of paper. As our car approached, now moving very slowly, the figures began to move. But they didn't run or walk. They glided. Their feet didn't seem to touch the ground. They moved in perfect unison, still holding hands, across our lane toward the shoulder of the road. No one in our car said a word. The radio had gone to static, though I don't remember anyone turning the dial. The glowing children reached the edge of the road, and then they vanished. Not like they walked into the trees or anything. They literally disappeared, like someone had switched off a light. For a few seconds, nobody moved or spoke. Then Kyle started crying, and Richard accelerated again. My mom twisted around in her seat. "Did you see that?" she asked me, her face pale in the dim light. I nodded, unable to speak. Richard cleared his throat. "They were probably just reflections, or some kind of, I don't know, some kind of optical illusion." "Reflections don't move like that," Mom said quietly, "and they don't just disappear." "What were they?" I finally managed to ask. I don't know, honey, Mom said, reaching back to squeeze my hand. But we're okay. Everything's fine. But I could tell by the way her hand trembled that she didn't believe that. The rest of the drive was tense and silent. Emma slept through the whole thing, and Kyle eventually drifted off again. But I stayed wide awake, staring out the window, terrified I might see those glowing figures again. I kept thinking they might appear right next to the car, floating alongside us as we drove. Richard turned the radio back on, but kept switching stations like he couldn't settle on one. Mom kept checking the rearview mirror. We arrived at my grandparents' house around 1 in the morning. The porch light was on, and Grandpa was waiting up for us. He helped bring in our bags while Grandma, still in her bathrobe, made hot chocolate for everyone. The adults thought Kyle and I should go straight to bed, but we were still too wound up. We all sat at the kitchen table, and that's when Mom finally told them what we'd seen. She described the glowing children, the way they moved, how they vanished. Richard tried to downplay it, saying it was probably just deer or maybe some kind of reflection, but Mom cut him off. They were children, Richard. They were holding hands. I'll never forget the look on my grandmother's face. She was holding her mug of hot chocolate, and she set it down so hard that some of it sloshed onto the tablecloth. Her face had gone completely white. "Where exactly did you see them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard described the location, about 15 miles back, just after that big hill where the highway curves around the old McKinley property. Grandma and Grandpa exchanged this look that made my stomach knot up. "You might as well tell them, Martha," Grandpa said to Grandma. Grandma took a deep breath. "About 20 years ago, there was an accident on that stretch of highway. 2 little girls, sisters, were in a car with their father. The car broke down, and they got out to walk to the nearest house for help. It was night, and a truck came over that hill too fast. The driver didn't see them until it was too late. The kitchen felt suddenly colder. They were holding hands when it happened," Grandma continued. "The older sister was trying to keep her little sister safe, pulling her off the road. They found them, still holding hands. I remember the goosebumps that rose on my arms, how my throat went dry. People around here talk about seeing them sometimes," Grandpa added. "Glowing figures crossing the highway, always at night, always holding hands. The highway department even put up warning signs after the accident, but they took them down a few years later, said it was causing more accidents because people would slow down looking for ghosts." "That's just local superstition," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," Grandma replied, "but you saw something tonight, didn't you?" Nobody argued with that. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept seeing those glowing figures whenever I closed my eyes. I couldn't stop thinking about those 2 sisters, holding hands, trying to get to safety. I wondered if they were still trying to cross that road, not realizing they'd already died. The thought made me so sad and scared at the same time. The next morning, Richard insisted we take a different route back home when our visit ended. Nobody objected. Years later, when I was in high school, I did some research on the accident. It happened in 1983. The girls were named Lily and Sarah Cooper, ages 8 and 6. Their father survived the accident but died 3 years later. Suicide, though the newspapers didn't say that directly. The truck driver was never charged. It was ruled an accident, but he moved away from Pinecliff County shortly after. Some locals said he claimed to see glowing children in his rearview mirror every night. I've driven through Pinecliff County many times as an adult. I always take the interstate now, which runs parallel to Highway 43, but about 5 miles to the east. Sometimes I look across to where I know that old highway runs and wonder if those girls are still there, still crossing that road, still holding hands. Kyle doesn't remember that night at all. Emma still insists she slept through everything and thinks we made it up to scare her. Mom rarely talks about it, and Richard absolutely refuses to discuss it. But I know what I saw. I know those glowing children were real, whatever real means in this context. I think about them often, especially on foggy nights, when the light plays tricks at the edges of my vision. I've never gone back to that spot on Highway 43. I don't think I ever will. Some places hold on to the past too tightly, and some memories are best left undisturbed. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and see two distant headlights approaching over a hill, I feel my heart race and my hands grip the steering wheel tighter, bracing myself for what might appear in the beam of my headlights. And I always slow down on hills now, just in case. Story 13. I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, thinking I hear that damn jingle. It's been over 3 months since spring break and I've graduated college now, but I can't shake what happened in Cedarview. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family and the police, but I need to get this off my chest. I was back home for spring break in mid-March, just a week to decompress before my final push to graduation. Cedarview is this quiet suburban town where nothing ever happens. I grew up there, knew every street, every shortcut through the neighborhoods. It was supposed to be relaxing. Monday morning, I woke up early like I always do. I'm a morning person, always have been. My parents were still asleep when I grabbed my gym bag around 6:15. The neighborhood was completely quiet, just that peaceful morning vibe with birds starting to chirp and the sun barely coming up. I remember checking the temperature on my phone as I got in my car. 42 degrees, still pretty cold for March. I backed out of the driveway and was just cruising through the neighborhood when something caught my eye that didn't belong. An ice cream truck, just sitting there at the curb a few blocks from my house, at 6:30 in the morning, in 40-degree weather. I slowed down a bit as I passed it. It was this old white truck with faded cartoon characters painted on the side. I couldn't see anyone inside. The serving window was closed, and it looked like it was just parked. No music playing, nothing. I remember thinking it was weird, but then again, maybe the driver lived nearby and just parked his work vehicle on the street. Whatever. I had a workout to get to. I spent about an hour and a half at the gym, did my usual routine, nothing special. Didn't think about the ice cream truck at all while I was there. It wasn't until I was driving back through the neighborhood around 8 that I noticed the truck was still in the exact same spot. Something about it just felt wrong. I can't explain it exactly, but it was like an itch in my brain. Why would an ice cream truck be parked on a residential street at 6:30 in the morning when it's too cold for ice cream and no kids are even out? And why was it still there nearly 2 hours later? I decided to circle the block for another look. That's when I saw him. There was a guy in the driver's seat now. From what I could see, he looked like he hadn't showered in days. Greasy hair, this scraggly beard that didn't look intentional, more like he just hadn't bothered to shave. But what really got me was his nose. It was long and pointed, almost beak-like, and when I drove by, he turned and made eye contact with me. I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't just that he looked creepy, it was the way he stared, like he recognized me specifically or something. I didn't slow down this time. I just kept driving and went straight home. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was being ridiculous. I showered, had some breakfast with my mom when she got up and tried to relax. Around 11, I went outside to shoot some hoops in the driveway, something I used to do all the time in high school. That's when I noticed the ice cream truck again. It was parked just 3 houses down from ours. Same truck, same faded paint job, just sitting there with no sign of the driver. I missed my next shot and just stood there, basketball in hand, staring at it. My mom called me in for lunch, and I went inside without looking back. After lunch, I kept glancing out the windows, trying to be subtle about it. Around 1 o'clock, the truck was gone. I felt relieved for about 20 minutes until I happened to look out the front window and saw it parked across the street, just a few houses down in the opposite direction. It was moving around our neighborhood, changing positions, but never playing music, never stopping to sell ice cream, because there weren't any kids out anyway. It was a weekday in March, and most kids were in school. I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want them to think I was being paranoid, but I was starting to get really creeped out. I remembered my younger brother had a pair of binoculars in his room from a bird-watching phase he went through. He's away at college too, so I went into his room and found them in his closet. I positioned myself at my bedroom window, which faces the front of the house, and used the binoculars to look at the truck. At first, I didn't see anyone inside. Then I noticed movement and focused the lenses better. The driver was in there, but he wasn't looking at the road or out the front window. He had his own pair of binoculars and was looking directly at our house. I almost dropped the binoculars. Our eyes met through our respective lenses, and for a second, it was like he was right there in front of me. He had these pale blue eyes that looked almost yellow in certain light, and they were wide open, staring right at me. The moment he realized I'd spotted him, he lowered his binoculars and started the truck. I watched him pull away, driving slowly down the street until he turned the corner and disappeared. I was shaking. This wasn't just weird anymore. It was threatening. I told my dad when he got home from work around 5:30. He listened carefully, and I could tell he was concerned but trying not to show it too much. Probably just some weirdo, he said, but he went outside and walked around the block anyway, checking to see if the truck was still nearby. It wasn't. We had dinner, watched some TV, and I started to think maybe I'd overreacted. My dad suggested the guy might be casing houses for a burglary, and he said he'd call the police in the morning if we saw the truck again. By 11, I was tired enough to head to bed, despite still feeling uneasy. I must have fallen asleep around midnight. I remember checking my phone one last time at 11:52. What happened next still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I woke up suddenly at 3:07. I remember the time precisely because I checked my phone immediately after. Something had pulled me out of a deep sleep. It took me a few seconds to realize what it was, a faint melody playing outside, the unmistakable jingle of an ice cream truck, just barely audible, like it was playing at the lowest possible volume. As I became more alert, I heard another sound, a light tapping on my window. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor. My first thought was that it must be a tree branch, but there aren't any trees close enough to the house to reach my window. The tapping came again. Tap, 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 deliberate and rhythmic. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The ice cream jingle was still playing, soft and distorted, almost dreamlike. I didn't want to look. Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind, telling me not to approach the window, but I did. I moved slowly across my room, staying low. When I reached the window, I carefully raised myself just enough to peer out. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. The ice cream truck was parked directly in front of our house, its headlights off, just barely visible in the glow of the street lamp. Standing on our front lawn was the driver. The scraggly beard and pointed nose were unmistakable even in the dim light. But he wasn't alone. He was holding hands with two small children, one on each side of him. They couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, a boy and a girl wearing matching pajamas. They weren't struggling or trying to get away. They were just standing there, completely still, holding the man's hands and staring up at my window. The man raised his free hand and waved at me, a slow, deliberate gesture. Then he smiled, revealing teeth that looked too sharp, too numerous in his mouth. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over my desk chair. I ran to my parents' room and shook my dad awake, telling him between panicked breaths what I'd seen. He jumped out of bed and told my mom to call the police while he grabbed the baseball bat he keeps in their closet. We rushed downstairs and out the front door, my dad in front with the bat raised. But the lawn was empty. The street was empty. The ice cream truck was gone. The police arrived within minutes. They took my statement and searched the area but found nothing. They seemed to take it seriously when I described the children, but I could tell they were skeptical about some guy using an ice cream truck to kidnap kids, and then just standing around on random lawns in the middle of the night. I didn't sleep at all that night, or much for the rest of my break. 3 days later, it was all over the local news. 6-year-old twins, a boy and a girl, had gone missing from their beds in a neighborhood about 30 minutes from ours. They were last seen when their parents put them to bed, wearing matching space-themed pajamas, the same pajamas I'd seen on the children standing on our lawn. I went to the police again immediately. This time they took photographs, asked more detailed questions. They put out an alert for the ice cream truck, but nobody ever found it. I went back to school the following week with a hollow feeling in my chest. I couldn't concentrate on classes or my upcoming graduation. All I could think about were those kids and whether what I saw was real or some kind of sick game the kidnapper was playing. Why would he show himself to me? Why come to my window in the middle of the night? Was he trying to taunt me? Was he going to come back? It's been 3 months now. The twins are still missing. Sometimes I think about driving back to Cedarview just to see if that truck is still around, but another part of me is terrified of what I might find. I've moved to a new city for my job after graduation, but I still find myself scanning every street for ice cream trucks. I still wake up at 3 in the morning sometimes, convinced I can hear that faint jingle. And every time I see a child holding hands with an adult, I look twice at their faces, wondering if they're really where they're supposed to be. I don't know why he chose our house. I don't know what he wanted from me. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see those 2 little kids standing perfectly still on my front lawn, holding hands with a monster disguised as an ice cream man. Story 14. I've never told this story to anyone before. Not my family, not even my therapist. I guess I've been too scared of how crazy it sounds, but also because remembering it all makes my skin crawl. It's been 7 years now, and I still wake up sometimes feeling like someone is watching me. I was 20 when I left my small town in France to become an au pair in America. My English wasn't perfect, but it was good enough, and I was so excited for the adventure. The agency matched me with the Joseph family in this picture-perfect suburb in Connecticut. Beautiful houses with manicured lawns, good schools, the whole American dream package. Mr. Joseph was some kind of investment banker, and Mrs. Joseph did charity work, which seemed to mostly involve organizing fancy fundraisers and going to lunch with other wealthy women. Their house was exactly what you'd expect, huge compared to anything I'd seen in France, with 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, and a big backyard with a pool that was covered for the season when I arrived in September. I had my own room with a private bathroom, which felt incredibly luxurious. The Josephs had 2 boys, Brock, who was 12, and Brandon, who was 9. I still remember the day I arrived. Mr. Joseph picked me up from the airport in his shiny BMW. He was polite but distant, asking basic questions about my flight while mainly talking business calls. When we pulled into their driveway, Mrs. Joseph came out wearing this perfect white outfit with her blonde hair pulled back, looking like someone from a magazine. She hugged me with this stiff embrace that didn't reach her eyes, but I was too nervous to really notice. Then the boys came out. Brock barely looked up from his phone, mumbling hi, before asking if he could go back inside to finish his game. But Brandon just stood there, staring at me. He had these intense blue eyes that seemed too adult, too calculating for a 9-year-old. When Mrs. Joseph prompted him to say hello, he tilted his head slightly and asked, "Is she the maid?" With this weird little smile that made my stomach turn. "No, honey," Mrs. Joseph said with a forced laugh. "Maureen is our au pair. She'll be taking care of you when Dad and I are busy." Brandon kept staring at me. "The last one didn't stay long," he said, then turned and walked back inside. Later that night, after unpacking, Mrs. Joseph came to my room to go over the schedule. Almost as an afterthought, she mentioned that Brandon could be difficult. She made it sound like typical childhood misbehavior, nothing worth worrying about. Just that he was sensitive and needed clear boundaries. Looking back, I realized she was trying to downplay it. They must have gone through several au pairs before me, and they were desperate to keep someone. The first week was deceptively normal. I drove the boys to school, picked them up, helped with homework, and made them snacks. Brock was easy. He just wanted to be left alone with his Xbox and his friends. But Brandon watched me constantly. I'd be cooking dinner and turn around to find him standing in the doorway, just staring. No smile, no words, just watching. When I asked if he needed something, he'd say no in this flat voice and walk away, only to reappear somewhere else in the house minutes later. By the second week, the incidents started. Small things at first. My hairbrush disappeared, then reappeared in the refrigerator. My phone charger went missing, only to be found cut into pieces in the trash. When I asked Brandon about these things, he'd look confused and say he didn't know anything about it. Mrs. Joseph just sighed and said kids could be mischievous. Then the lies began. Brandon told Mrs. Robinson next door that his parents locked him in a box at night as punishment. He told his teacher that Brock tried to choke him in his sleep. He even told the mailman that I made him eat dog food when his parents weren't home. Each time, the Josephs would have to scramble to explain that Brandon had an active imagination. They never seemed angry with him, just resigned, like this was normal behavior they'd learned to manage. One evening, while the Josephs were at a dinner party, I was helping Brandon with his homework. Out of nowhere, he said, "The girl before you left because of me." My blood ran cold, but I tried to keep my voice casual. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, not looking up from his math worksheet. "She got scared. Most people do eventually." Then he looked up at me with those unnerving eyes. "Do you scare easily, Maureen?" I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what Brandon had said. The next morning, I casually asked Mrs. Joseph about the previous au pair, trying to sound merely curious. Her face tightened, and she said something vague about family emergency and having to return home suddenly. When I pressed a little, wondering where home was for her, Mrs. Joseph changed the subject. About a month into my stay, I started noticing small things moved in my room. My journal shifted from where I'd left it, clothes rearranged in my drawers. I began to feel paranoid. wondering if I was just being forgetful. Then one night, I woke up with sharp pains in my back. When I pulled back the sheets, I found thumbtacks pressed into my mattress, points up, hidden under the fitted sheet. There were at least 20 of them, carefully arranged. I was shaking as I collected them all, putting them in a small jar as evidence. The next morning, I showed Mrs. Joseph, trying to keep my voice from breaking. She looked concerned, but when Brandon came into the kitchen, her expression changed. "Brandon, did you put thumbtacks in Marine's bed?" she asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. Brandon's face was a perfect mask of innocence. "No, Mom. Why would I do that?" "See?" she said, turning to me with a placating smile. "Maybe they were in the laundry somehow, or perhaps you had them in your pocket and they fell out." I knew she was lying to herself. I could see it in her eyes, fear mixed with denial. She didn't want to admit what her son was capable of. Later that day, while cleaning up after lunch, I noticed a small hole drilled in the bathroom door adjoining my bedroom. I covered it with tape and moved my dresser in front of that door, using it instead of my ensuite bathroom whenever possible. I started taking showers only when the boys were at school. I considered contacting the agency, asking to be placed with another family, but I was embarrassed. What would I say? That I was afraid of a 9-year-old? That I couldn't handle a child? I had saved for 2 years to afford this trip to America, and the thought of returning to France in failure was too much to bear. So I stayed, convinced I could handle it, that things would get better. They didn't. Brandon's behavior escalated. He began following me everywhere in the house. I'd be reading in the living room and suddenly feel eyes on me, turning to find him standing silently in the hallway. I'd be taking clothes from the dryer and hear breathing behind me, spinning around to see Brandon watching from the shadows. He never said anything during these moments, just stared with those cold, calculating eyes. One particularly bad day, I was weeding the garden while the boys played in the yard. I pulled away some overgrown bushes and froze. There, arranged in a neat row, were 3 dead rats. Their legs had been tied together with twine, and their bellies were cut open. I immediately ran inside and vomited in the kitchen sink. When I told the Josephs, showing them the gruesome display, Mr. Joseph's face went pale. But Brandon, who had followed us outside, started crying, claiming he'd found them that way and was too scared to tell anyone. Mrs. Joseph immediately comforted him, telling him it wasn't his fault, while Mr. Joseph disposed of the rats. No one addressed the obvious, that Brandon had mutilated those animals. That night, for the first time, I locked my bedroom door. I pushed a chair under the handle for good measure and slept with my desk lamp on. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke to a soft scratching sound. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I heard it again, a gentle scraping at my door. I lay perfectly still, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. "Marine?" Brandon's voice came through the door, soft and sing-song. "Are you sleeping, Marine?" I didn't answer. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then silence. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, there were small scratch marks on my door, at about the height of a 9-year-old's hand. I started finding excuses to be out of the house whenever possible. I'd take the boys to parks, libraries, anywhere public. Brandon seemed to behave better around others, as if he knew enough to maintain the facade of normality in public. But his eyes always told the truth. He was watching, calculating, waiting. 3 nights after the scratching incident, I woke in complete darkness. My lamp had been turned off. Before panic could fully set in, I sensed movement beside my bed. I froze, afraid to even breathe. "You're afraid of me." Brandon's voice came from the darkness, much closer than it should have been. "Everyone is, eventually." I lunged for the lamp and switched it on. Brandon was sitting in my reading chair, pulled up right next to my bed. In his hand was a kitchen knife, the large one Mrs. Joseph used to carve roasts. He wasn't threatening me with it, just holding it across his lap, running his small finger along the blade. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sound tore from my throat before I could stop it. Footsteps thundered down the hall. My door burst open, and the Josephs appeared, looking panicked. Brandon had already hidden the knife somewhere. I never saw where it went, and was now rubbing his eyes as if he'd just woken up. "What's happening?" Mr. Joseph demanded. "He had a knife," I said, pointing at Brandon with a shaking finger. "He was sitting there with a kitchen knife." Brandon looked confused, then scared. "I was sleepwalking," he said, his voice small and childlike. "I don't remember coming in here. I'm sorry if I scared you." Mrs. Joseph immediately went to him, wrapping him in her arms. "It's okay, sweetie. You didn't mean to." "There was a knife," I insisted, my voice rising. "He was sitting there with a knife." Mr. Joseph looked around the room. "I don't see any knife, Maureen. He hid it. Check under the chair. Check his pockets." "That's enough," Mrs. Joseph said sharply. "Brandon sleepwalks sometimes. We should have warned you, but these accusations are completely inappropriate." They took Brandon back to his room, leaving me shaking and doubting my own sanity. The next morning at breakfast, Brandon acted completely normal, asking for more orange juice and talking about a science project. But when the Josephs weren't looking, he caught my eye and smiled, a cold, knowing smile that said he remembered everything. 2 days later, Mrs. Joseph accused me of stealing her pearl necklace. She said it was a family heirloom worth thousands of dollars. I denied it, of course, but then she dumped out my purse on the kitchen counter, and there it was, tangled among my lip balm and loose change. Brandon stood in the doorway behind his mother, that same small smile playing on his lips. Mrs. Joseph fired me on the spot. She said she wouldn't call the police if I left immediately, claiming she was being merciful because I was young and foreign. Mr. Joseph booked me a flight back to France for the following morning and drove me to a hotel for the night, barely speaking during the 30-minute drive. As I packed my things, tears streaming down my face, Brandon appeared in my doorway one last time. "I told you everyone leaves because of me," he said, his voice eerily adult. Then he turned and walked away, humming softly to himself. I spent 7 years trying to forget the Joseph family, and especially Brandon. I eventually came back to the States for graduate school, built a life here with friends and a career I love. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced someone is watching me from the darkness. And I wonder what kind of monster Brandon has grown into, how many others he's tormented since me, and whether anyone will ever see him for what he truly is before it's too late. Story 15. I just need to get this off my chest. I can hardly sleep anymore, and my therapist says writing about it might help, even if it's just to put the experience into words. I'm honestly terrified this will happen again. I don't know who'd want to do this to me, or maybe it's all in my head. I really don't know anymore. I've been a sales associate at Central City BMW for almost 5 years now. It's a good job with decent commission, and I've built up a solid client base. Part of the job is being available for clients, so I always answer my phone, always. Even unknown numbers could be potential customers, and in this economy, you can't afford to miss a sale. About 2 months ago, I was at home after a particularly long day. I'd closed 3 deals and was exhausted, just wanting to unwind with some Netflix and maybe a beer. My phone rang around 10:30 at night with a number I didn't recognize. Normally I'd answer, but it was late, and I figured if it was important, they'd leave a voicemail. The phone stopped ringing, but then immediately started again. Same number. Must be important, I thought, so I picked up. "Hello, this is Andrew." No response, just some heavy static. Then I heard it, my own voice. "Absolutely, and with the executive package, you're looking at premium leather and the upgraded sound system. I can have that ready by Thursday if we finalize today." It was a conversation I'd had with a client that morning. Just my side of it, crystal clear but surrounded by this weird static. My stomach dropped. I hung up immediately and stared at my phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I told myself it was some kind of telemarketing thing. Maybe my call had been recorded for quality assurance or something and was playing back by mistake. But it felt wrong. It felt targeted. The next night, almost exactly the same time, my phone rang again. Different number, but I recognized the area code. Local. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" Static again, but then my voice. "No, Mrs. Harrington, we don't typically offer that discount, but let me see what I can do for you. I value your business and want to make sure you're happy with your purchase." That conversation had happened that day, just hours earlier. I hung up, my hands shaking. This wasn't random. Someone was recording me, but how? And why just my side of the conversations? For the next 5 nights, the same thing happened. Different numbers, all local, all calling between 10 and 11 p.m. Each time, it was my voice from conversations I'd had that day. I started keeping a log, the times, the numbers, what conversation was played back. I even started recording the calls on my second phone. The police would need evidence, right? By day 4, I was a wreck. I wasn't sleeping, I was looking over my shoulder constantly, and I started checking my office and car for bugs or hidden cameras. Nothing. I even had a buddy who works in IT come over and sweep my house and phone. He found nothing suspicious. The paranoia was getting bad. I went from being a relatively normal guy to someone who triple-checked that doors were locked. I started sleeping with the lights on in every room. I moved my dresser in front of my bedroom door at night. I stopped taking calls at my desk and would go sit in my car instead, where I could see if anyone was watching me. On day 6, I went to the police. They were useless. The officer barely looked up from his computer as I explained what was happening. "Do these calls contain any direct threats to you, Mr. Keller?" "No, but have you received any threatening messages in addition to these recordings?" "No, they're just recordings of me, but unfortunately, sir, without a direct threat, there's not much we can do. It could be a prank, telemarketing, or even crossed lines. We can take a report, but I recommend changing your number if it continues. I know what you're thinking, just change your number, but in sales, your number is everything. Clients have it saved, and changing it means potentially losing business. Plus, my number was on all my business cards, our website, everything. Changing it would be a professional nightmare." After a full week, the calls suddenly stopped. That was almost worse. Why did they stop? Were they planning something else? I kept expecting my phone to ring each night, sitting there staring at it between 10 and 11, but nothing happened. I couldn't take it anymore. After 3 more sleepless nights waiting for calls that never came, I changed my number. I told my boss it was for personal reasons, and he wasn't happy, but I just couldn't live like that anymore. I spent a whole weekend updating clients, changing all my contact info and hoping this would end the nightmare. For about 2 weeks, there was nothing. I started sleeping a little better, though I still kept the dresser in front of my door. I was beginning to think maybe it had been some sick joke that was now over. Then it happened again. 10:45 p.m., unknown number. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely answer the phone. I should have ignored it, but I needed to know. Hello? My voice cracked. Static. Then my voice from earlier that day. I appreciate you choosing us for your vehicle needs, Mr. Davis. I'll email you the paperwork tonight and we can finalize everything tomorrow. I completely lost it. Who is this? What do you want from me? Money? I'll pay you. Just tell me what you want. The static continued for a moment, then stopped. A voice, not mine, spoke through what sounded like some kind of voice changer. 10,000. Cash. I'll stop. Fine, whatever. Just stop this. Where do I leave it? Your address. Tomorrow night, 11 p.m. The call ended. How did they know where I lived? Had they been watching me this whole time? I immediately regretted agreeing to it, but I was desperate. I didn't have 10,000 in cash, but I had about 3,000 saved and could pull another 5 from my credit card. It would put me in debt, but I just wanted this to end. The next day, I went to the bank and withdrew everything I could. I even called in sick to work. I couldn't focus anyway. I spent the day pacing my house, checking windows, looking for any sign I was being watched. I kept thinking about my mom. She started hearing voices when I was about 12. Paranoid schizophrenia, they called it. She'd tell us people were recording her, following her, that the neighbors had cameras in our bathroom. Back then, I thought she was just sick. Now I was terrified I might be heading down the same path. Was any of this even real? By 10:30 that night, I was sitting at my kitchen table with the money in an envelope and my dad's old handgun in front of me. I'd never fired it before, but having it there made me feel a little safer. The minutes ticked by so slowly. 11 o'clock came and went. Nothing. 11:30. Nothing. By midnight, I was a complete mess, convinced someone was toying with me or waiting for me to let my guard down. No one ever showed up. No call, no knock at the door, nothing. That was 3 weeks ago. There haven't been any more calls since then, but I'm still not okay. I ended up seeing a therapist who suggested the whole thing might have been a manifestation of stress combined with my family history. She thinks I might have been experiencing early symptoms of what my mom had. But I have the recordings. I can play them back and hear those calls. I have my call log showing all those different numbers. This happened, or at least I think it did. I've moved to a smaller apartment across town now. I don't feel safe in my old place anymore. I've told only a couple of close friends what happened, and I can tell they don't fully believe me. They think I'm having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I am. The thing that scares me most is that I don't know which would be worse, that someone was actually doing this to me, or that I'm losing my grip on reality. Either way, every time my phone rings now, especially after dark, my heart nearly stops. I still keep the dresser in front of my door at night. I still check my phone for any apps I don't recognize. I still wonder if someone is listening to every word I say. And the worst part? I'll never know why. If it was real, why me? What did they want? If I'm sick, why these specific delusions? I just want my normal life back, but I don't think that's possible anymore. Every unknown number, every bit of static on a call, every time someone looks at me for a little too long, it all sends me spiraling. I'm writing this because I need to know if anyone else has experienced anything similar. Am I going crazy? Or is there something more sinister at work here? Because right now, I don't even trust my own mind anymore. Story 16. I don't even know why I'm writing this down. Maybe it's because I can't sleep anymore without checking every window and door in the house. Maybe it's because I need someone to believe me, since my mom only started taking me seriously a month ago. Whatever the reason, I need to get this off my chest. I live in what most people would call a nice neighborhood, Oakwood Lane. It's that typical suburban setup with houses spaced just far enough apart to give you privacy, but close enough that you're supposed to feel safe. We're surrounded by countryside, with woods backing up to most properties. Growing up, I thought it was the perfect place to be a kid. Now, I know better. The first time it happened, I was 9. My little brother was 7. We were walking our dogs near the main road, something we did all the time because Mom said it was safe, as long as we stayed together. It was just starting to get dark, that time when the streetlights kick on, but there's still enough daylight to see clearly. We were almost at the end of our street when I heard someone call out, "Hey, come here!" I turned and saw this massive white SUV parked at the entrance to our neighborhood. The driver had his window down and was leaning out, waving at us. He was tall, white, with this military-style crew cut. I remember thinking he looked official, like someone's dad who might be in the army or something. My little brother, he's always been too trusting, actually started walking toward the SUV. I grabbed the back of his jacket and yanked him so hard he nearly fell over. Something in my gut was screaming that this wasn't right. The guy kept beckoning, saying something about needing help, but I was already pulling my brother toward home. We ran the rest of the way, and when I looked back, the SUV was driving away fast. When we got home, I told Mom about it. She just shrugged it off like it was nothing. "He probably just needed directions," she said, not even looking up from her laptop. "Not everyone is a kidnapper, Ethan." After that, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I had overreacted, but the way that guy looked at us, it wasn't right. His eyes were too focused, too hungry. Fast forward to Halloween 2014. I was 10, my brother 8. Our neighborhood was buzzing with trick-or-treaters when word spread that a black sedan was following groups of kids. Mr. Reynolds, who lives 3 houses down, confronted the driver when the car crept past his yard for the 3rd time. The sedan actually accelerated toward Mr. Reynolds, forcing him to jump aside, then sped off. No license plates. That's what everyone kept saying afterward. The car didn't have any plates. This was right after that college student, Hannah Graham, was murdered about an hour from here. Everyone was on edge already, and this incident sent the neighborhood into lockdown mode. Parents started escorting their kids everywhere, and for a while, no one was allowed to play outside alone. Eventually, like most scares, it faded from immediate concern, though never completely from memory. Summer of 2018, I was 14 then, I started pet sitting for the Hendersons who live at the end of our street. Their house sits by itself, with woods on 3 sides. They'd go away for weekends and pay me to feed their cat and let their dog out. It was easy money. One night around 10, I went over to let their dog out for his last bathroom break. It was pitch black. Their house doesn't have streetlights nearby, and they're at least a quarter mile from the nearest neighbor. When I arrived, everything was normal. I let the dog out into their fenced backyard, waited for him to do his business, then brought him back in. As I was locking up to leave, I noticed headlights through the living room window. A black sedan was parked at the end of the driveway, engine running, lights on. It hadn't been there when I arrived 15 minutes earlier. The Hendersons weren't due back for 3 more days, and there was literally no reason for anyone to be there. My heart started hammering in my chest. I turned off the porch light and peered through the blinds. The car was just sitting there, like it was waiting. I remembered the Halloween incident years before, and my palms started sweating. Part of me wanted to call my mom to come get me, but that would mean waiting there for at least 10 minutes. Instead, I slipped out the back door and cut through the woods to get home. I knew those woods well enough to navigate them in the dark, and I figured it was safer than walking past that car. The whole way home, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. When I got home, I didn't tell Mom about it. After years of her dismissing my concerns, I didn't see the point. I just stopped pet sitting for the Hendersons, making up excuses about being too busy with school. Then came the quarantine. School shut down, sports canceled, everyone stuck at home. I'm on the cross-country team, so I started running around the neighborhood to keep in shape. Our area has these winding rural roads with not much traffic, perfect for running if you're careful. About a month ago, I noticed something odd. Every time I went for my afternoon run, around 4, I'd see the same white SUV. At first, I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people have white SUVs. But then I realized it was following me, keeping pace about 100 yards back. If I sped up, it sped up. If I slowed down, it slowed down. This happened for 10 days straight. To test if it was coincidence, I changed my running time to 5 o'clock. First day, no SUV. I actually laughed at myself for being paranoid. Then on the second day at 5, there it was again, following me at the same distance. By this point, I was freaking out, but trying to stay rational. I started varying my route, taking different roads each day. The SUV always found me. I even tried running in the morning once, but after about 15 minutes, there it was. The 11th day was when everything came to a head. I was running my usual route, but planning to cut through the woods at a certain point to lose the SUV if it showed up. About 2 miles in, I came to this side road that branches off the main one. At the end of it, I spotted a black sedan parked sideways, blocking the path. Something made me pause and look more carefully. There was someone underneath the car, just their legs visible, like they were hiding, waiting. My blood went cold. I turned around to go back the way I came and saw the white SUV at the top of the road, effectively trapping me between them. In that split second, I had to make a choice. The hidden person under the car or the SUV I'd been dealing with for days. I chose the devil I knew and sprinted toward the SUV. As I got closer, the driver's door opened and a man got out. Tall, crew-cut, white, instantly recognizable from 8 years ago. The same man who had tried to lure me and my brother when I was 9. He started running toward me, but years of cross-country training meant I could easily outpace him. As I pulled away, he called out, "I just want to talk to you, Ethan." He knew my name. He knew my fucking name. I ran home faster than I've ever run in my life. When I burst through the front door, my mom took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. Through gasping breaths, I told her everything, not just about that day, but all of it. The man from when I was 9, the car at the Hendersons, the SUV following me for days. This time, she believed me. She called the police immediately. They took my statement, but without a license plate or clear description beyond white SUV and black sedan, they didn't have much to go on. They increased patrols in our area for a couple of weeks, but nothing came of it. What keeps me up at night isn't just the close call I had. It's the realization that these weren't random incidents. These men, whoever they are, have been targeting kids in my neighborhood for years. They've been patient, methodical. They knew my name and my running schedule. They knew when the Hendersons would be away. They've been watching us, watching me, for a very long time. I haven't gone running since that day. I don't go anywhere alone anymore. My mom finally installed security cameras around our house last week, but I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, waiting. The most terrifying part? That man who tried to lure me when I was 9 is the same one who chased me last month, 8 years later, and he's still here, still hunting. Sometimes I look out my window at night and wonder if there's a white SUV or a black sedan parked just beyond the streetlights, watching our house, waiting for me to let my guard down. And I wonder how many other neighborhoods they're stalking, how many other kids they're following. If you live in a suburban area that borders rural countryside, pay attention to the vehicles around you, especially the ones that seem to show up too often or at odd times. They might just be passing through, or they might be watching, waiting, learning your routines. I don't know what these men want, but I know they've been trying to get it for at least 8 years. And I'm afraid they're not going to stop until they do. Story 17. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened to me last October. I don't usually travel alone, but I had to visit my parents who recently moved to this small town about 3 hours from the city. Hotels were weirdly expensive that weekend, so I decided to try Airbnb for the first time. Big mistake. I found this place that seemed decent enough from the photos. A small 2-bedroom house in what looked like a quiet neighborhood. The price was good and the host had positive reviews, so I booked it for 3 nights. I arrived around 8 in the evening. It was already dark, and as I drove through the neighborhood, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first, but then I realized what it was. Despite it not being that late, none of the houses had lights on, not a single one, except for the Airbnb I rented, which had the porch light on as promised by the host. The streets were empty too. No cars driving by, no people walking dogs, nothing. October in this area isn't particularly cold, so you'd expect to see at least some activity. I brushed it off, thinking maybe people just went to bed early in small towns or something. The key was in a lockbox by the door. I got in without any issues and started settling in. The house was exactly as pictured, nothing fancy but clean and functional. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room with a TV. I unpacked, heated up some food I'd brought with me, and decided to chill and watch a movie before bed. Around 9:30, someone knocked on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the host hadn't mentioned they'd be stopping by. I paused the movie and checked my phone to see if they'd messaged me. Nothing. The knocking continued, more insistent this time. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing there, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a black t-shirt with some logo I couldn't make out under an open red flannel shirt. He looked normal enough, I guess, but something about his expression made me uneasy. He looked tense, expectant. I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain on. "Can I help you?" The moment he saw me, his expression changed. He looked genuinely startled, like I was the last person he expected to see. He stared at me for a few seconds, mumbled something under his breath that I couldn't catch, then said, "Sorry, wrong house," and walked away. I watched him through the window as he went down the driveway and disappeared around the corner. No car, so he must have been on foot. That struck me as odd since the houses in this neighborhood were pretty far apart. I double-checked all the locks before going back to my movie, but I couldn't focus anymore. Something about that interaction felt wrong. Why would someone be knocking on doors at night in a neighborhood where they clearly didn't know who lived where? I texted the host. "Someone just came knocking. Is that normal around here?" They replied almost immediately, "Probably just someone selling something. Nothing to worry about." That didn't make sense. The guy wasn't carrying anything, and door-to-door salespeople don't usually work after dark. But I let it go and tried to get some sleep. The next day, I left early to visit my parents and stayed with them until evening. I got back to the Airbnb around 8, made myself dinner, and sat down to watch some Netflix. At almost exactly 9:30, there was another knock at the door. My stomach dropped. I went to the peephole and I swear to God it was the same guy. Same black t-shirt, same red flannel shirt, same expectant look on his face. I stood there frozen, not making a sound. He knocked again, harder this time. Against my better judgment, I opened the door with the chain still on. His reaction was identical to the night before, that same startled expression, like he couldn't believe it was me answering the door. But this time, instead of just walking away, he said, "I'm not looking for anyone," and then left. What the hell does that even mean? I'm not looking for anyone. Who says that? I immediately called my parents and told them what was happening. My dad suggested it might be a case of mistaken identity. Maybe the guy was looking for whoever used to live there or stay there before me. My mom was more concerned and suggested I come stay with them instead, but their place was tiny and they were already cramped with all their moving boxes. I called the host again. This time they took longer to respond, and when they did, all they said was, "Just don't answer the door. It's nothing to worry about." That response made me even more uneasy. Why weren't they concerned? Was this a regular occurrence? Did they know something I didn't? I checked all the windows and doors again, making sure everything was locked. I moved a chair against the front door for good measure. Then I left my bedroom door open so I could hear better if anyone came around again and tried to get some sleep. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a scratching sound. My phone said it was 2:17 in the morning. The scratching continued. It was coming from outside, like someone running their nails along the siding of the house. Then came the knocking, loud, insistent knocking at the front door. I got out of bed as quietly as I could and crept toward the living room. Through the window, I could see movement in the darkness, shadows shifting across the yard. And at the door, illuminated by the porch light, was the same man in the red flannel shirt. But this time he wasn't alone. I could make out other figures hanging back in the shadows. I couldn't see their faces, just their silhouettes. There were at least 3 or 4 of them from what I could tell. My heart was pounding so hard, thought it might burst out of my chest. I retreated to the kitchen where I'd left my phone and started dialing 911. As I waited for the operator to pick up, I heard more scratching, this time at the back of the house. I turned around and nearly dropped my phone. There was a face in the window, another man, younger than the one at the front, staring right at me. Our eyes locked for a second before he disappeared. The 911 operator answered, and I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. "There are people trying to get into my Airbnb, multiple people. They're surrounding the house." She asked for the address, which I gave her, and assured me they were sending officers right away. Then she told me to find a secure room and stay on the line. I ran back to the bedroom, locked the door, and pushed the dresser in front of it. All around the house I could hear them now. Footsteps on the porch, more scratching, someone trying the windows. I heard glass break somewhere in the back of the house. Then the front door, They were trying to force it open. The chair I'd placed against it scraped across the floor as they pushed. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than a few minutes, but it felt like hours. I was certain they were going to get in. I was trapped, alone, and terrified. Just as I heard the front door start to give way, police sirens wailed in the distance. The effect was immediate. The noises stopped. I heard rapid footsteps as they ran away from the house. By the time the police arrived, whoever they were gone. The officers found evidence of attempted break-ins at several windows, and the front door frame was damaged where they'd tried to force it open. One window in the back was broken, but the security bar I'd noticed earlier had prevented them from getting in. The police searched the area but found no one. They took my statement and agreed to patrol the neighborhood for the rest of the night. One officer stayed in his car outside the house until morning. When the sun came up, I packed my things and got the hell out of there. I called the host to tell them what happened and that I wouldn't be staying the third night. Their response was bizarre. They seemed almost unsurprised. They apologized in this detached way and offered a partial refund, but didn't ask any questions about the incident or seem concerned that their property was nearly broken into. I've tried to make sense of it since then. The most logical explanation is that they were looking for someone specific, maybe the previous tenant or guest. They got confused when they saw me instead of whoever they expected. Maybe they thought I was lying, that the person they wanted was inside and I was covering for them. But the host's reaction still bothers me. Did they know these people? Was there some history there I wasn't aware of? And why did the entire neighborhood seem deserted? I'll never know what would have happened if the police hadn't arrived when they did. I don't know if they wanted to rob the place, or if they were after someone, or if they had something more sinister in mind. All I know is that I'm never staying in an Airbnb again, especially not in a small town where nobody seems to have their lights on after dark. Story 18. I've never told this story outside my closest friends, but it's been 3 months and I still can't shake what happened that night. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of it. I'm an experienced hiker, been doing solo trips for about 7 years now. I'm not someone who scares easily in the wilderness. I've encountered bears, gotten lost temporarily, and dealt with unexpected storms. But nothing prepared me for what happened at that fire lookout tower in Nova. I'd been researching abandoned structures in national forests for months. I know entering these places is technically trespassing, but the photography opportunities and the sense of history are worth it to me. The Nova lookout tower caught my attention because it wasn't on any official hiking maps, and the few forum posts I found about it mentioned incredible views of the valley. After weeks of planning, I finally had a free weekend in early October. The weather forecast showed clear skies, perfect for photography. I packed carefully, sleeping bag rated for cold weather, portable camping stove, 2 days of dehydrated meals, 4 liters of water, first aid kit, my Canon DSLR, extra batteries for everything, and a satellite GPS that I'd invested in last year. I also brought bear spray, not that I expected to need it. The drive to the trailhead took almost 3 hours. I parked at an unmarked Forest Service road, double-checked my GPS coordinates, and started hiking around 11 in the morning. The trail, if you could call it that, was basically non-existent. Just occasional breaks in the undergrowth where maybe a few others had walked before. The forest was dense, mainly pine and oak trees with thick undergrowth. The October air had that crisp smell of decaying leaves and pine. and everything was quiet except for the occasional bird call. I kept checking my GPS to make sure I was heading in the right direction, and after about 4.5 hours of climbing steadily uphill, I finally spotted the tower through a break in the trees. It was taller than I'd expected, maybe 60 feet high, with a small cabin-like structure at the top. The metal frame was rusted in spots but looked surprisingly intact for something abandoned. The green paint was peeling off in large flakes, but structurally, it seemed solid. I approached cautiously, not just because it might be unstable, but because I half expected to find a forest ranger or someone else there. The clearing around the tower was overgrown with tall grass and wildflowers, but there was a small area that had been trampled down. Someone had been here recently. I tested the first few rungs of the metal ladder by putting my weight on them one at a time. They creaked, but felt secure enough. The climb up was nerve-wracking, not because I'm afraid of heights, but because each metal step made this hollow, clanging sound that echoed through the forest. I kept imagining the whole structure collapsing beneath me. When I reached the top platform, I had to push open a heavy wooden trap door that led into the observation room. The hinges were rusty, and it took a good shove to get it open. The room was small, maybe 150 square feet, with windows on all 4 sides. There was an old wood-burning stove in one corner, an ancient-looking glass table bolted to the floor in the center, and built-in benches along 2 walls. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except for one bench that looked like it had been wiped clean recently. That should have been my first warning sign, but I was too captivated by the view to think about it much. The tower stood on one of the highest ridges in the area, and I could see miles of uninterrupted forest in every direction. Mountains rose in the distance, their tops already dusted with early snow. Not another man-made structure in sight. The complete isolation was exactly what I'd been looking for. I set up my sleeping bag on the clean bench, arranged my supplies, and took dozens of photos of the sunset. The sky turned this incredible mixture of orange and purple as the sun dipped behind the mountains. When darkness fell, it was absolute. No city glow, no distant lights, just billions of stars overhead. I heated up one of my dehydrated meals on my camping stove, beef stroganoff, not great but does the job, and ate while watching the stars through the windows. By 11 p.m., I was starting to get drowsy. I'd hiked almost 9 miles that day, mostly uphill, and the physical exhaustion was catching up to me. I brushed my teeth, using some of my water supply, zipped myself into my sleeping bag, and tried to get comfortable on the hard wooden bench. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember is jolting awake and checking my watch. 1:15 a.m. Something had woken me up, but I wasn't sure what. The tower was silent except for the occasional creak from the metal frame adjusting to the cold night air. That's when I saw it, a strange reddish light moving between the trees, maybe 500 yards from the base of the tower. It wasn't a flashlight or headlamp. The light had this weird floating quality to it, almost like a torch, but it moved too smoothly for someone carrying a flame. It weaved between the trees, sometimes disappearing completely before reappearing several yards away. My first thought was that it must be another hiker, but who would be hiking through such dense forest in the middle of the night? And why use such an unusual light source? I watched it for maybe 10 minutes as it moved in what seemed like a circular pattern around the tower, never getting closer but never moving away either. Then it disappeared entirely. I kept staring out the windows, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing. I started to wonder if I'd imagined it or if it had been some kind of weird reflection. After about 30 minutes with no sign of the light, I relaxed a bit and got up to stretch my legs. I was standing at the north-facing window, taking in the view of the night forest, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was someone standing at the base of the tower, just standing there, completely still, looking up. Even though it was dark, I could make out the silhouette against the lighter color of the clearing's ground. It was definitely a person, tall, wearing what looked like a jacket or coat, and they were staring directly at me. I froze. For a few seconds, I couldn't move or think clearly. Then I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded weak and shaky even to my own ears. The figure didn't respond verbally. Instead, they slowly raised one hand in what seemed like acknowledgement or greeting. Then, without any rush, they turned and walked into the tree line. They didn't have a light with them, which struck me as impossible. The forest was pitch black, and no one could navigate through it without some kind of light source. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, staring at the spot where the figure had disappeared. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself there must be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a forest ranger checking on the tower. Maybe it was another hiker who'd spotted my light and was curious. But why not say anything? Why just walk off into the dark forest? I double-checked that the trapdoor was secure, then got back into my sleeping bag. I tried to convince myself to go back to sleep, but I couldn't stop listening for sounds of someone climbing the tower. Every creak and groan of the metal made me tense up. I kept my flashlight and bear spray close, just in case. Somehow, I must have dozed off again, because I woke up suddenly to the unmistakable sound of metal clanging. Not the random creaks of the tower adjusting to temperature changes, but rhythmic, deliberate sounds, like someone climbing the ladder. I sat up, fumbling for my flashlight with shaking hands. The sound stopped abruptly. I held my breath, straining to hear anything over the sound of my own heartbeat. Nothing, just silence. I crawled to the trap door and pressed my ear against it. Still nothing. After a minute or two of internal debate, I gathered my courage and carefully lifted the trap door a few inches, shining my flashlight down the ladder. Empty. No one was there. I closed the trap door again, sliding my backpack on top of it as an extra measure. I was seriously considering packing up and leaving, night hiking be damned, when I heard it. Footsteps on the wooden observation deck that surrounded the cabin. Not inside where I was, but outside, circling the cabin. Running footsteps. I spun around, flashlight in hand, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there through the windows. For a split second, I saw something dark rush past the west-facing window, a shadowy figure moving far too quickly for me to make out any details. That was it. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed my sleeping bag into it as quickly as possible, and shoved the most essential items inside: GPS, water, phone, headlamp. The footsteps continued circling the cabin, sometimes slow, sometimes fast, like whatever was out there was toying with me. I took a deep breath, yanked open the trapdoor, and practically threw myself onto the ladder. The metal rungs were ice cold against my hands as I scrambled down as fast as I could. About halfway down, I heard the unmistakable sound of the trapdoor slamming shut above me, followed by quick footsteps moving toward the ladder. I didn't look up. I didn't want to see what was following me. I just kept moving, my hands and feet finding the rungs on autopilot. When I was about 10 feet from the ground, I jumped the rest of the way, landing hard and rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. I ran into the forest, not even caring about the direction, just needing to put distance between myself and the tower. After a few hundred yards, I stopped to catch my breath and turned on my GPS with trembling hands. The trailhead where I'd parked was southeast of my position. I switched on my headlamp and started moving, constantly checking over my shoulder. The hike back was a nightmare. Every shadow looked like a person, every sound like footsteps. I tripped over roots and got scratched by branches, but I didn't stop. I just kept going, fueled by pure fear. It took me almost 3 hours to reach my car. When I finally saw it through the trees, I nearly cried with relief. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sat there shaking for several minutes before I could even start the engine. I still don't know what happened that night. Was it someone playing a cruel prank? Was I hallucinating from exhaustion or altitude? Or was it something else entirely? I've looked into the history of the area since then and found a few vague references to strange occurrences near that ridge, but nothing specific. I've thought about reporting it to the park rangers, but what would I even say? That I was illegally camping in an abandoned structure and got scared by strange lights and footsteps? All I know is that I'm never hiking alone again, and I'm definitely never going back to Serra Nova. Some places should just be left alone.